The Mute at Hogwarts. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction. So don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 151, Dumbledore the Wise. Guan Qiong held out his hand to block Hermione's way, his eyes fixed on the door of the cell. Who is it? He gripped his wand tightly, ready for battle. Hermione did the same, picking up her wand and preparing to cast a spell. Guan Qiong, are you in there? I have something to show you. A voice came from outside the door, soft and melodious, like singing. It was Luna. Guan Qiong breathed a sigh of relief, but a hint of caution remained. He opened the door, and there stood Luna, her long golden hair tangled in a mess. Her silver eyes widened as she stared at Guan Qiong and Hermione in the cell. Hermione, hello, you're here too, Luna greeted, then held out her hands, showing Guan Qiong what she held. A notebook. Guan Qiong, look, I caught alive a madman. Her face was filled with excitement, like a child who has found a new toy and can't wait to share it with a friend. But Guan Qiong involuntarily took a step back, dragging Hermione with him. Don't be afraid, Guan Qiong. This Amat beast hasn't eaten, so it's out of strength, Luna said with a smile. She even shook the book in her hands, as if it were a cage, something she could shake unconscious. Guan Qiong looked at the brand new notebook in Luna's hands, rubbed his eyes, and sighed. There was nothing he could do. He closed his eyes, took 2 deep breaths, and when he opened them again, he had switched to a magical perspective. Within the notebook, he could see a crude diagram of a magical circuit, resembling a palace. Within it, a gray cloud-like object surged continuously. Meanwhile, from within the cloud, several tentacle-like things extended toward Luna, as if trying to touch her life circuits. As Guan Qiong watched, the gray cloud quickly dissipated, as if it had encountered the wind. In just a few breaths, it was gone. Luna looked at the notebook in confusion, shaking it helplessly. She said with a hint of regret, it ran away. What a shame, Guan Qiong was delighted. He had only wanted to see if Luna was affected or possessed, but he hadn't expected his gaze to actually dispel the thing. Enduring waves of dizziness, Guan Qiong turned to look at Hermione. Hermione's life circuits had been affected. Several thin gray threads extended from the other side and entwined with her life circuits, staining some areas gray. However, the affected area was not large, perhaps only 7%. Moreover, as Guan Qiong watched, the gray threads, like a beast fleeing in panic at the sight of danger, vanished in the blink of an eye. Even the affected areas of Hermione returned to their original state. After seeing that Hermione was back to normal, Guan Qiong closed his magical vision. By then, his temples were throbbing, and he felt extremely exhausted, as if he would fall asleep if he closed his eyes. Hermione, however, felt a sense of relief. Her eyes were confused for a moment, then brightened again, as details she had previously overlooked came to mind. How could this happen? How could I have believed that elf so easily? The professors had clearly told me that magical items of unknown origin and strange communications were dangerous, and I had forgotten. Hermione slapped her head in regret. Although she knew that this was undoubtedly influenced by some kind of magic, she also felt that part of the reason was her lack of vigilance and determination, otherwise she should have been immune. It's a madman, it's the most deceptive, Luna said from the side. It's not a madman. June just said it was the soul of a dark wizard, Hermione retorted. Guan Qiong took a few deep breaths, forcing himself to stay awake, and waved his hand to stop the two from talking. Let's go find the professor first. Don't talk to anyone else along the way, and don't trust them. They might have been influenced and controlled. Guan Qiong rubbed his eyes. Although he felt somewhat pleased that his magical gaze could dispel the memories that seemed to be Voldemort's, he couldn't use it in his current state. Unless he wanted to be unconscious for a few days. Let's hope we don't run into any senior students. We can't handle them. Oh, if only I had been alert sooner, Hermione said. She recalled many things she had previously thought were wrong, like Harry and Ron's sudden love of studying, and how many people now carried notebooks. She had clearly been confused, but then she ignored them. Thinking about it now, it was truly horrifying. The professors had to be informed quickly, otherwise the entire school would be controlled. "I'll go too." Luna raised her wand and waved it excitedly, like a grave finder. They walked outside, passing Myrtle's cell. She seemed to be crying inside, for some unknown reason. Just as the three of them were exiting the girls' bathroom with full caution, they spotted an unexpected figure outside. Dumbledore. He stood outside the bathroom, holding a long, silver-white staff. On the top of the staff was a spinning iron-like object. "Oh, I don't think two girls and a boy should be in the girls' bathroom at the same time, even if it's an abandoned place," Dumbledore said with a smile, winking playfully at Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong was stunned. She hadn't expected Dumbledore's first words to be these. "Professor Dumbledore, Guan Qiong and I have discovered." Hermione's face lit up at the sight of Dumbledore, and she spoke hurriedly. But Dumbledore reached out to stop Hermione. He examined the object in his hand. It appeared to be an alchemical device. The eye on it turned to Hermione and Luna, looked at them, and then blinked twice. "It seems you've gotten rid of the influence, but your connection to it was not deep to begin with, so it shouldn't cause any alarm," Dumbledore said with relief. What did this mean? Guan Qiong looked at Dumbledore in confusion, as did Hermione and Luna. "This is a plan. That's all I can say to you two. I'm sorry, but to ensure the smooth progress of the plan, you can't hear anything more. Moreover, some things are two-way. When you know the cursed knowledge, the curse of knowledge will also target you," Dumbledore said to Hermione and Luna. Then, he turned to look at Guan Qiong. "As for you, Guan Qiong, you probably have a lot of questions. Don't worry, I will answer them one by one. Now, please follow me." Chapter 152. What happened? Guan Qiong sat at a long desk in Dumbledore's office, a cup of hot tea in his arms. On the desk, a tiny, wrinkled chick blinked its red eyes at Guan Qiong, chirping crisply. Guan Qiong looked at Fawkes, who looked completely different from last year. He reached out and stroked his bald head. Fawkes stretched his slender neck and rubbed his head against his hand. It was strange. Just a moment ago, Guan Qiong had been a little panicked. After all, the entire school seemed to be under Voldemort's influence, but now his heart had calmed down, his worries no longer so severe. Perhaps it was his trust in Dumbledore. After all, he was the strongest and greatest wizard alive. Guan Qiong thought, taking a sip of tea. The scalding hot water warmed him, and the unique oriental aroma soothed him, his fatigue dissipating. "Now that the tea you gave me is gone, I asked someone to buy some more from the East. The price difference in Eastern tea is astonishing. Fortunately, I still have a little money," Dumbledore said with a smile, leaning back in the high-backed chair behind the desk. Guan Qiong looked at the teacup in his hand, guessing it must be the finest tea from the East, though he didn't know what it was. But it was definitely something he'd never get to taste again in his lifetime. "Professor Dumbledore, what's going on?" Guan Qiong, still reeling from what had happened at school, put the teacup down, took out his wand, and beamed a light. "Oh, let me see where I should begin." Dumbledore's expression grew a bit more serious at this, but he remained relaxed and composed. His composure also gave Guan Qiong the impression that everything happening at school was under control, nothing serious. "It all started with Madame Pomfrey, you know, a very competent doctor. She told me that there were too many people at school with colds, and many were suffering from strange symptoms of weakness. Logically, after taking her stimulant, the students should be feeling better soon," Dumbledore began. Guan Qiong also recalled the flu epidemic last year. It seemed that quite a few people were indeed infected, and it lasted for quite a while. The life circuits of many people seemed dim, including Percy. But he had not expected that it was actually related to Voldemort's memory. He fell into a misunderstanding, believing that Voldemort could only appear in one notebook at a time and affect one person. During that time, Ginny happened to hand over a notebook to him. Then there was an attack on the school. As you know, everyone was very scared, and the legend of the Chamber of Secrets began to spread. From that time on, I had doubts. Dumbledore's bright blue eyes looked at Guan Qiong from behind his half-moon glasses. They were bright and energetic, not at all like an old man. Although it may sound a bit boastful, I am an elder after all. My years of experience have accrued knowledge and wisdom, which help me keenly perceive the connection between the two. Besides, I have this thing. Dumbledore produced the object he had held earlier. It appeared to be an alchemical artifact, silvery white, made of some unusual metal with patterns, giving it a mysterious appearance. Atop it, a metal eye spun constantly, like an antenna, receiving information from its surroundings, or a camera, constantly observing its surroundings. This is something I commissioned Nicholas Flamel to make. It's an alchemical tool. You may have heard of him. He also created the Philosopher's Stone last year. He has made outstanding achievements in this field, and his creations are among the finest in the world. Dumbledore generously praised Nicholas Flamel's wisdom and alchemical skills. Its name, let me think, is the Eye of Senior. Senior is the name of a Cyclops. Its eyes possess the power to see through all disguises and can even locate objects on Earth through the stars. If you're interested in the history of giants, you can find information about it in the book Prehistoric Giants. Okay, back to the point. This thing was originally used to monitor Voldemort. Last year, his spirit body exploited a vulnerability and infiltrated the school. To protect the students, I asked Nicholas Flamel to create it. Guan Qiong looked at the alchemical item, regretting his current state. Otherwise, he would have at least used his magical vision to inspect it. He took a sip of tea and continued to listen to Dumbledore's narration. It didn't move at first. It wasn't until several attacks that I consulted Nicholas Flamel again. He remotely guided me to modify it, and now it can detect things. Dumbledore held the item and injected some magic power into it. The Eye of Senior began to rotate. In just a few blinks, it completed a full circle, as if scanning. When it stopped, a beam of light shot out from its pupils, hovering in midair, forming a map of Hogwarts Castle. Atop this map, densely packed with gray dots of light, they slowly shifted, seemingly representing individuals. Dumbledore then spoke slowly. A memory, or something half memory, half soul, has infiltrated the school and connected with other things within it. With a renewed infusion of magic, a thick gray line appeared around the dot of light, coiling like a python across the entire map of Hogwarts Castle. I suspect it's a memory left behind by Voldemort. He possesses this power, and for decades, he's the only one capable of opening the Chamber of Secrets and releasing its contents, Dumbledore said. But if you discovered it long ago, why? Guan Qiong waved her wand, questioning. Although he was somewhat surprised that Dumbledore could discover these things, it made sense when he thought about it. After all, he was the strongest and greatest wizard of this era. How could he be so easily fooled by Voldemort's memories? In the end, only 3 young wizards were left to deal with Voldemort's memories. His knowledge and wisdom, coupled with his great power and extensive network of contacts, were enough to give him enough methods to solve various problems. That's why Guan Qiong found it a little strange. If Voldemort's memories were discovered so early, why did most of the students in the school become affected by Voldemort's memories? Thinking about the scene in the class before, Guan Qiong shuddered from the bottom of his heart. That feeling was too scary. Chapter 153 Dumbledore's Plan. Oh, that's what I'm going to tell you next, Dumbledore said with a smile, remaining calm and composed. This is a plan. Dumbledore waved his hand, and 4 beams of light descended from the ceiling, landing on the map of Hogwarts Castle. Voldemort's memories have revealed something else within the castle. I'm sorry, but I can't tell you about this. It's forbidden knowledge, and I even suspect Voldemort's memories also touch upon this knowledge, that something exists within the Chamber of Secrets, and Voldemort's memories are also hidden within it. Through it, he can freely travel through the castle and exert his influence. Dumbledore tapped the map, and the python began to stir. The trouble is, I don't have a very good way to deal with the Chamber of Secrets. The Founder's power and understanding of magic are greater than mine. I can't find the Chamber of Secrets without destroying the castle. Guan Qiong seemed to understand. He waved his wand and expressed his thoughts. You want to lure him out? The memories of Voldemort? Yes, Dumbledore nodded. Before, he was always very cautious and his movements were very quiet, so there was not much we could do. It wasn't until a month ago, when you were hospitalized, that he started to move more. Guan Qiong couldn't understand. He remembered that just now, his magical perspective had caused the memory of Voldemort to dissipate, like mist meeting sunlight. Dumbledore saw Guan Qiong's confusion, stroked his long beard, and said with a smile, you may have noticed that he seems to be avoiding you. He hasn't made any big moves during your time. Yes, what's going on? Guan Qiong asked the wise Dumbledore. I don't know, Dumbledore shook his head. Child, I don't know much about you. I can only say that your body holds many secrets, and these secrets you need to discover and excavate for yourself. Well, that's as good as nothing. Guan Qiong sighed helplessly. Dumbledore didn't dwell on the subject any further, returning to the previous incident. Over the past month, More and more students have been affected. A little elf named Tom has appeared in their notebooks. That elf understands them, helps them, and easily draws them into his fold. With Tom's help, their grades have improved significantly. Of course, they've paid a price. Dumbledore extended his right hand, aligning his thumb and index finger. The two were less than a centimeter apart. A little bit of vitality. This makes them a little weaker than normal, but it's not too noticeable, like recovering from a cold. That sounds like a good deal. Guan Qiong waved her wand. It was like in a past life, when just a little less sleep could lead to better grades for students. I'm sure every headmaster would know how to do that. Dumbledore's expression was a bit strange. After a moment, he spoke. That sounds quite good, but it's just an unexpected bonus. That little bit of vitality won't cause the students to show too many problems. Tom thought he could hide it from the school. If every student gave him a little vitality, the accumulated amount would allow him to recover and increase his strength, but what he doesn't know is that all this is happening under our watchful eyes. Dumbledore pointed to the Hogwarts map before him. On the map, countless thin lines appeared on the Grey Python's body, connecting one grey point after another, like a spider web. The Grey Python was the spider on the spider web. As he influences the students, he is also bound by the influence. As the number of students increases, he will be bound by this web, and then, caught. Guan Qiong looked at the Hogwarts map floating in the air. It was undeniable that Dumbledore was Dumbledore. He had quietly prepared a trap. Is there anything I need to do? Guan Qiong asked. That's exactly why I asked you to come, Dumbledore said. Actually, what you need to do is, don't do anything. Dumbledore looked at Guan Qiong through his glasses. Go to class as normal, study as normal, communicate as normal. Don't show any signs of abnormality. Also, don't disturb him like you did just now. Guan Qiong was silent. Did he mean to just be a spectator? Don't worry, Guan Qiong, we've made the best arrangements. Every professor has his own tasks, with the exception of Professor Lockhart, of course, who isn't well suited to this kind of work. I understand, Guan Qiong agreed. Thinking about it carefully, there really wasn't any need for him to do anything. He was only a second-year wizard, and even if he wasn't physically injured, he couldn't participate in this situation. In fact, if it weren't for his magical vision, which would have dispelled Voldemort's memories, making it easier for Voldemort to notice something, Dumbledore might not have explained so much to him. Just like the trio and the other students, they didn't even realize what was happening. By the way, there's one more thing I think I should tell you, Dumbledore said. Voldemort's memory is contained in notebooks. Our final plan requires collecting all the notebooks to prevent his escape. Guan Qiong took a sip of his somewhat cold tea and remained silent for a moment before waving his wand. I also have a notebook. I got it from Ginny Weasley. I sensed something was wrong with it, so I took it, but found nothing. Guan Qiong no longer hid the fact that the notebook was a Horcrux. Dumbledore specifically mentioned this, presumably because he knew about it through some means. Guan Qiong glanced at Senior's eye and thought it was probably it. Furthermore, now was a good opportunity to get rid of the notebook Horcrux. He was very weak, his brain couldn't withstand the impact, and Dumbledore couldn't use legilimency on him. As for the future, he had already thought of a plan. Occlumency wasn't something he could learn in his second year, but he had found something with a similar effect. Dumbledore nodded with satisfaction and said with a smile, "This is quite normal." After returning to Hogwarts Castle, Voldemort's memory returned like a fish back to the sea. This is what has always troubled me, but fortunately, there is now a way to catch him. Chapter 154 Contradictory Tom. After leaving Dumbledore's office, Guan Qiong's panic subsided. Since everything was going according to Dumbledore's plan, there was nothing to worry about, he just had to wait for the final outcome. Of course, he still went to the room of requirement first, retrieved the original notebook, and handed it to Dumbledore. Honestly, Guan Qiong felt like a heavy burden had been lifted. He had been worried that things might not match his understanding, but he hadn't expected Dumbledore to be so supportive. As the headmaster of Hogwarts School and the most powerful wizard of his time, Dumbledore couldn't have been completely inactive. He watched helplessly as students were attacked, only for Harry, a single student, to confront Voldemort. After handing the notebook to Dumbledore and exiting the headmaster's office again, Guan Qiong walked towards the Gryffindor common room. Along the way, most of the students around him held notebooks and quills, writing as they walked. It felt like déjà vu. A scene Guan Qiong had witnessed in his previous life, except that the people in that life were holding smartphones. Guan Qiong, no longer worried or panicking, observed them and found that, just as Dumbledore had described, they were only slightly pale and their eyes dull, as if they had just recovered from a cold. There were no further problems. Their behavior and logic were normal, and their communication with friends was clear, not like those soulless puppets being controlled. At most, their reactions were a little slow, and they seemed a little bored with communicating with people, preferring to bury their heads in their notebooks. It felt like they could live with their notebooks forever. It was obvious that Tom had cast some kind of magic on them, making them more dependent on him and making others ignore the abnormality. It was a bit like psychological suggestion. However, Dumbledore couldn't hide it, and Guan Qiong suspected that the other professors probably couldn't either. Of course, except for Lockhart. After returning to the Gryffindor common room, Guan Qiong first found Hermione. She was anxiously awaiting Guan Qiong's return, glancing around with a wary look in her eyes. Honestly, if she didn't have the utmost trust in Dumbledore, she would have wondered if he had been influenced as well. But her mind told her that this was the most unlikely scenario. After all, he was the greatest and most powerful wizard. At least, not in this era. So, June, what did Dumbledore tell you? Hermione asked quietly after seeing Guan Qiong return. Luna followed, staring at Guan Qiong with wide eyes and curiosity. Fearing she might be harmed, Hermione took her back to the Gryffindor common room. Dumbledore has it all figured out. He's been aware of this for a long time. Guan Qiong waved his wand, causing a point of light to appear before them. He dimmed the light so that only Hermione and Luna could clearly see the words before them. Those further away would only see a blur. So, what do we need to do? Hermione asked the same question as Guan Qiong. Nothing. Just wait patiently. The professors are prepared. They'll handle this matter, Guan Qiong thought for a moment before adding. Just live your life normally. Pretend you didn't notice anything, lest you disturb the dark wizard's soul and let him know something's wrong. Is that so? A hint of disappointment crossed Hermione's eyes. She had been sorted into Gryffindor for a reason. Beneath her thirst for knowledge lay a lurking thirst for adventure, so she felt a bit of a pity. However, she was a sensible person, knowing what was most important, so she nodded firmly. I understand. I'll act like nothing happened. The sensitizer is almost ready, so I should think of a way to catch Lockhart off guard. Guan Qiong glanced at Luna, who stared back at him, as if they were playing a game where whoever blinked first lost. So, do you understand, Luna? Guan Qiong caused a light to appear between them. I understand. You're planning to capture a madman, Luna whispered excitedly, her eyes sparkling. I can help, too, she volunteered. It's the dark wizard's soul, Hermione corrected Luna. No need. Let the professors handle this. If we get involved, it's more likely to cause an accident. Guan Qiong shook her head. But the Amat beast is very clever and runs fast, making it difficult to catch, Luna said. It's the soul of a dark wizard, Hermione helplessly covered her forehead. Trust Dumbledore. He'll find a way. Guan Qiong maintained a high level of trust in Dumbledore. I don't know when Dumbledore will act. To be honest, Tom was quite helpful. It's a pity. Hermione looked away and sighed. Guan Qiong followed her gaze and happened to see two heads buried in notebooks. Next to them were homework assignments from various courses, almost finished. They were Harry and Ron. After Tom showed up, they stopped borrowing homework from Hermione and Guan Qiong and completed it independently. While it was unclear how much of it was Tom's work, it was clear that this was a significant improvement. Compared to the other students, they seemed to be more deeply involved. Who knew if it was because Voldemort was giving them special attention? As if noticing Hermione and Gwen's gaze, Harry and Ron looked up, smiled at them, then lowered their heads again to continue writing. Hermione was still marveling at Harry and Ron's progress, but Gwen was lost in thought. While the smiles were Harry and Ron's, Gwen had the feeling someone else was controlling their movements. The curve of their smiles was nearly identical, as was the look in their eyes, as if they were copied. Was it Tom? Gwen felt a little strange. It seemed a contradiction. On the one hand, Voldemort's memories were afraid of him, dispersing when observed through his magical vision. On the other hand, they were acting in a provocative manner. It had happened earlier in Lockhart's defense against the dark arts class. Everyone around him smiled at him, almost making him think he was hallucinating. It was strange. Could it be that with so many people controlling them, they had become bolder and less afraid of him? Guan couldn't figure it out. Chapter 155 The History of Potions. After receiving Dumbledore's assurance, Guan Qiong's life settled down. He could ignore the constant clutching of notebooks and the occasional gazes. Fortunately, Guan Qiong had settled back into normal routine, spending most of his time in the room of requirement, studying magic and improving his skills. The rest of his time was spent in the library, reading the potions books recommended to him by Professor Snape. Then there were the weekly patrols of the Forbidden Forest, now supplemented by weekly tutoring sessions with Professor Snape. As Dumbledore's arrival seemed to draw nearer, Guan Qiong noticed more than once that the professors gathered for discussions and that Madame Pomfrey was often seen wandering the castle, seemingly observing the students. She seemed to have done this before, but Guan Qiong, unaware of it at the time, paid no attention. In the room of requirement, Guan Qiong was reading a copy of Potions of Origin. Before him, a few small objects, such as teacups, quills, and parchment, hovered. As time passed, his condition improved somewhat. At least he could now cast the levitation charm without too much strain. Guan Qiong gently waved his wand, and parchment and quill floated before him. He controlled them and began to write down his notes. Potions is a unique discipline, derived from herbology, just as transfiguration was derived from charms. Over time, they developed their own system and acquired a rich and diverse content. In the earliest times, potions was non-existent. Wizards first discovered the various magical herbs in the world and their effects. They could buff themselves, weaken their enemies, or increase the number of offspring from their tamed magical creatures. Thus, herbology was born. However, wizards soon discovered that some herbs had more than just a single primary effect. They also possessed various secondary effects. Furthermore, the effects of herbs varied depending on individual constitutions. Some herbs that seemed beneficial could be like poison to others. To solve this problem, wizards began combining various herbs and processing them in various ways, attempting to find a stable combination that would produce only one desired primary effect. Any side effects would disappear or be suppressed by the herb's combined effects. Thus, the science of potions was born, marking the very beginning of the discipline of potions. Herbology is the foundation of potions, an extension of herbology in a specific direction and the furthest along its path. Other approaches, such as herbal defense and offense, herbal hybridization, and herbal activation, are currently still included within herbology and have not yet been independently developed like potions. Guan Qiong flipped through the book The Origin of Potions, gaining a basic understanding of the emergence of potions. The latter part of the book briefly describes the overall development of potions, enticing readers to continue exploring the science of potions. In ancient potion scholarship, potions were referred to as the art of burning or divine blood born from ashes. This was largely due to the limited knowledge of various herbs at the time, and their processing methods were primitive. They simply burned them to ash. The ashes were then mixed together, and a liquid like water or moon spring was added to create a potion. However, this method did have some effectiveness. Ancient wizards used it to create potions such as blood-restoring potions and agility potions. While these methods are now obsolete, they undoubtedly pioneered potion making. In the subsequent middle period of potion research, more sophisticated methods evolved, surpassing the more primitive method of burning herbs to extract their properties. Methods such as liquid leaching, acid precipitation, carbon fumigation, and solar evaporation were all developed to process different herbs, amplifying their primary properties while eliminating or suppressing their undesirable ones, ultimately creating a potion that produced the desired effect. During this era, the number of potions increased dramatically. It seemed as if anyone could create their own potion, becoming a potion master. Every wizard began to process whatever plants they could find, combining them in their own unique combinations to create new potions. The development of potions progressed from barbarism to civilization, and then back again. During the century known as the fastest growth period for potions, a full 7,537 potions were invented and registered, and an unknown number remained unregistered. However, in reality, 9/10 of these 7,000 registered potions did not work as their inventors claimed, with some even having the opposite effect. It was undoubtedly the era of the fastest development of potions, with every wizard taking up the study of potions. But it was also undoubtedly the most chaotic era, with both genuine and counterfeit potions appearing in wizarding society, making it increasingly difficult for wizards to find a consistently effective potion. Finally, at the end of that century, the Potions Guild was established. Its initial members consisted of the 7 most powerful wizards of the time. They formed a council and oversaw the regulation of potions throughout the wizarding world. Subsequently, a large number of substandard potions were eliminated, and the development of potions began to gain momentum. To this day, potions with consistent effects are recorded, and commonly used ones are incorporated into textbooks, becoming part of the curriculum for young wizards. Potions officially became a separate discipline, much like transfiguration. Guan Qiong closed The Origin of Potions and breathed a long sigh of relief. He had finally finished. With a gentle wave of his wand, The Origin of Potions levitated and landed on the table. On the table before Guan Qiong lay 7 or 8 other books, each as thick as a city wall brick. Guan Qiong surveyed the books, scratching his head in frustration. He scanned them from top to bottom, then from bottom to top. Finally, with a gentle wave of his wand, a book in the middle levitated and landed before him. A collection of magical plant stories from around the world. Tired of reading? Relax with something interesting. Guan Qiong thought to herself as she opened the collection of stories of magical plants in the world in front of her. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 156, Two-Hearted Man. Guan Qiong opened a collection of stories of magical plants from around the world. The book's content varies between fact and fiction, the author blending personal experiences with legends to create a narrative reminiscent of Gulliver's travels. Several chapters, including the Sky Tree, the World Tree, and the Tree of Life in the Kabbalah, are distinctly mythical, yet richly and engagingly written, making them perfect for relaxing moments. Other chapters, such as the PRA and the land guarded by the mysterious man eating cabbage, are based on the author's own experiences, leaving one marveling at the vastness of the world. Other stories, such as the Two-Hearted Man, the Palm Fruit, and Black Nylon, are half-truths, half-fictions. The author encountered these legends in various places and wrote them down. Unlike myths and legends, these types of legends often have a prototype, but because the conditions for finding them are so challenging, often rare for centuries, they are relegated to the status of legend. Even today, many people seek these legendary objects in places where they appear, hoping to gain immense power or wealth. Guan Qiong casually flipped through the pages of a collection of magical plant stories from around the world. He paid no attention to the other stories, treating them merely as a leisurely read. However, the chapter The Two-Hearted Man made him sit up straight, a thoughtful glint in his eyes. The legend of the Two-Hearted Man originated in the Republic of Congo, a country located in West Central Africa, bordering Central Africa, Cameroon, Angola, Gabon, and other countries, while also facing the Atlantic Ocean on one side. The legend of the Two-Hearted Man dates back to ancient times, with the earliest recorded sighting occurring in the Abu Rimidi Forest region around AD 0, which later became Congo's Odzilla National Park. From the 15th to the 19th centuries, Congo was invaded by Portugal, Britain, France, and other powers, and the local shamans were either eliminated or assimilated by these British and French wizards. The legend of the Two-Hearted Man thus caught the attention of wizards from these countries, who established a wizarding town in the Abu Rimidi Forest dedicated to searching for the Two-Hearted Man. Unfortunately, no trace of the Two-Hearted Man was found until the 20th century. Then, in the 20th century, Congo gained independence and the invaders were driven out, but some wizards remained. They settled in a small town, isolated from humans, and devoted themselves to searching for the Two-Hearted Man. That town, welcoming wizards from around the world to explore and search, prospered, becoming a major transit point for wizards in Central and Western Africa, expanding into a small city called Evelyn. Most who visited the town planned to search the Abu Rim Forest for the Two-Hearted Man. Guan Qiong turned the page, and after reading about the historical background of the Two-Hearted Man, she finally reached the main story. Legend has it that deep within the Abu Rim Forest lies a magical tree called Sita. It's as large as a mountain, reaching up to the sky, yet its roots are short, vertical, and parallel, never intersecting. On this tree grow countless fruits called babases. These fruits resemble hearts and beat constantly, making a sound like thunder, disturbing the creatures of the Abu Rimidi Forest. On the Sita tree lives a tribe called the Lorenzi. For generations, they have lived on the Sita tree, feeding on babases. The Lorenzi tribe has a legend that says that when the gods created humans, they gave them perfect, symmetrical bodies, However, as humans became corrupted by worldly desires and became ugly, the gods removed one of their hearts, leaving them asymmetrical. This asymmetrical humanity became imperfect, losing its original and powerful power and becoming like any other creature on earth. Only those who traverse the Sita path can receive a second heart and achieve perfection. The Lorenzi believe this truth so firmly that every year they select a warrior to journey on the Sita, reaching the sky. Under the scorching sun, they consume the most perfectly developed babases, thereby receiving a second heart and becoming two-hearted. Two-hearted people possess two hearts and are the most perfect beings created by the gods. They possess immense strength, a lifespan unmatched by ordinary humans, and other abilities. The people of the Lorenzi tribe would honor each two-hearted person as their leader until the next appeared. Guan Qiong turned the page again. The collection of magical plant stories of the world records a clear story about a two-hearted people. Before the 15th century, 7 two-hearted people appeared. They either founded dynasties, became the most powerful in their region, or left Congo for other places. Invariably, these two-hearted people wielded immense influence. Starting in the year 0 AD, each of them influenced the Congo region for approximately 200 years, until the 15th century, and the legend has been passed down. This seems to prove that the two-hearted people existed. However, some believe that these accounts are entirely fabricated by later generations, specifically those in the 15th century. Otherwise, why would the two-hearted people disappear after the 15th century, leaving only a legendary name and a host of unexplained mysteries? For example, where exactly is the tree called Sita? If the Lorenzi tribe existed, where would it be? Why have wizards from England and France searched for 400 or 500 years without finding even a trace of it? Guan Qiong closed the collection of magical plant stories of the world and took a deep breath. He had his own opinion on the legend of the two-hearted man. Just like the stone heart on his finger, some things so-called legends might have once existed. It's just that for some reason, they died out at some point, leaving only traces. Guan Qiong believed this was the case with the two-hearted man. The descriptions of the two-hearted man were so detailed, the details of the legend, the descriptions of tribal life. How could such authentic records be left behind if they didn't actually exist? However, there were still many puzzling points, the most obvious being the tree called Sita, which reached to the sky. A tree of that size should have stood out among the crowd, even in a forest, and would have been easy to spot. But now, there was no trace of it, which made it hard not to doubt the legend's authenticity. Perhaps, I should go and see it sometime? Guan Qiong thought to himself. Chapter 157 Valentine's Day. Time slowly slipped by, and 2 weeks passed before arriving on February 14th. Guan Qiong and the trio arrived at the Great Hall for breakfast. Guan Qiong and Hermione walked in front, chatting occasionally, while Harry and Ron followed behind, notebooks in hand, still lost in their work. However, as they entered the Great Hall, they were all stunned by the sight. The walls were completely covered in dazzling pink flowers, making one wonder if they had entered a garden instead of a dining room. The ceiling was also enchanted, with a torrent of heart-shaped confetti falling from it like rain. Oh my god, Ron looked around in shock, not even paying attention to his notebook. Harry did the same. As Dumbledore had said, while they were affected, it wasn't much. Without external stimulation, they would become absorbed in their work, but if the stimulation became too strong, they would temporarily put down their notebooks. This made them appear normal, and it was this normality that prevented those around them from noticing anything was wrong. What the hell is going on? Harry asked as the four of them sat down at the Gryffindor table. His face was much paler than before, and his eyes had become a little dim, as if he had a serious illness. However, under some special magical suggestion, the others turned a blind eye to it. Guan Qiong pointed to the teacher's table, where Lockhart was wearing a pink robe, which matched the surrounding environment very well. He looked very happy, with a smile showing 8 perfect teeth. Beside him, the professors had different expressions. Professor McGonagall's already serious face was even more serious, as if she would call someone out for punishment in the next second. Snape's expression was also extremely cold, and his body leaned forward, as if he would take out a wand and cast magic at any time. Dumbledore's expression was very interesting, and he looked at Lockhart with a gentle smile. Lockhart waved his hand for silence, then spoke loudly, "Everyone, it's obvious that 2 months have passed since the last attack. I can guarantee that the Chamber of Secrets will never be opened again, because the criminals discovered my presence. They know that I was simply too busy for a while, and that if I were free, catching them would be a piece of cake. How dare he say that in front of Dumbledore? Ron muttered, then wrote something in his notebook and nodded in agreement. And now, today, February 14th, Valentine's Day. I'm sure you've all been looking forward to this day for a long time. In fact, I've seen from your actions that you can't wait to get there. So far, 46 people have given me cards, and I want to thank them all. I gave him one, Hermione suddenly said from beside Guan Qiong. As Guan Qiong turned to look at her, Hermione lifted her nose proudly. That card is coated with sensitizer, and I've added some potion to enhance its effects. Once he opens it and smells the sensitizer, he'll definitely spill everything. Sounds good, Guan Qiong nodded. Now that we're in public, Lockhart has been tricked. If he reveals everything in public, it's irreversible, everyone will be a witness. After all, he can't cast his oblivion charm on everyone, there are so many professors here. Meanwhile, Lockhart, prepped, pulled out a stack of cards, as if wanting to show them off. Wait a minute, I'll start asking about the past. He'll definitely follow up on the topic. The sensitizer will make him arrogant and overthink things, and he'll speak without thinking, Hermione said excitedly, her eyes sparkling. She was ready. But then, Lockhart paused. He looked at the cards in front of him, his expression shifting before a smile of complete control appeared on his face. Sure enough, it's like that again, he said with a loud laugh, pulling out a blue card from the pile. He then displayed a ring on his right hand. It had been cyan just moments before, but now it had turned completely black. Every time I receive a gift, I encounter this situation, someone who's jealous of me slips something dangerous into it. Unfortunately, they don't know that it has no effect on me, Lockhart said triumphantly. Instead of opening the card, he placed it on a nearby candlestick and lit it. He then used the hand with the ring on it to feel through the pile, as if searching for a second card with an added ingredient. Looking at the ring on his finger, which remained cyan, Lockhart breathed a sigh of relief and laughed. Only one this time. It seems those who envy me are beginning to be swayed by my charisma. In the past, there would always be 3 or 4 magic props, Hermione exclaimed softly, a hint of resignation on her face. Guan Qiong wasn't surprised. Lockhart had been scamming for so many years, there was no way he could rely solely on the oblivion charm. When Guan Qiong first saw Lockhart at Flourish and Blots, she'd noticed with her magical vision that he was adorned with numerous magical items. Magical circuits practically covered his entire body, practically armor to the teeth. Well, let's put these unpleasant incidents behind us. Affected by this, Lockhart lost the mood to open the remaining cards. Of course, it could also be that Dumbledore had said something nearby. Guan Qiong saw him move his lips. To thank you for your support, I've prepared a few little surprises for you this year. Lockhart clapped his hands. From the doors leading to the entrance hall, 12 sullen-looking dwarfs strode in, sporting golden wings and carrying harps. They were probably imitating the legendary Cupid. However, aside from their height, they bore no resemblance to Cupid. Their menacing expressions and gloomy eyes made Guan Qiong more inclined to believe they were members of the FFF than the god of love. Guan Qiong, whose hearing was slightly better than the others, seemed to faintly hear the dwarfs' whispered conversation. Does it have to be this far, big brother? Shut up, he's paying. Guan Qiong scratched his head. These are my friendly little cupids carrying cards, Lockhart said cheerfully. They'll be wandering around the school today, delivering Valentine's Day cards to you. Of course, there's more to it than that. Please allow me to keep this a little secret. Believe me, you'll love it. Chapter 158 Dumbledore's Valentine's Day Event. After Lockhart finished describing his Valentine's Day activities, Dumbledore also stood up. The students showed even more attention and respect to this wise elder than they did to Lockhart. As he stood, all eyes turned to him. Professor Lockhart's plans have inspired me, and I've prepared an activity for you all, Dumbledore said with a smile. The students erupted in excitement at his words, as this was unprecedented. Previous Valentine's Day celebrations had been minor sparring, never escalating to a school-wide level. Only this year, Lockhart had come along and created a Cupid dwarf, the purpose of which was unclear. The fact that Dumbledore had planned an activity piqued the students' curiosity. Judging by the other professors' expressions, they all knew about this, as none of them expressed surprise. Except for Lockhart, however, the students had already automatically dismissed him. This isn't good, Dumbledore. Why didn't you tell me beforehand? I hate the awkward situation of students praising my activity while ignoring yours, Lockhart shouted, but no one paid him any attention. Dumbledore waved his wand, and countless bright white pieces of paper rained down from the sky. They landed in front of each student, bound to their right hands, and then transformed into a silver jade bracelet. This will be a very interesting game, Dumbledore said with a smile. Once everyone's surprise had passed and their gazes turned to him, he began to explain. This bracelet will randomly display questions. Your task is to answer them as quickly as possible. Each time you answer a question correctly, the bracelet will change color slightly until it turns completely black. You then have a timer to return to the Great Hall for the next round. The winner will receive a prize of 100 gold galleons. Dumbledore finished speaking, and the students erupted in excitement. 100 gold galleons was a significant sum in the eyes of everyone. Even Malfoy, who came from a prominent family, had a fiery look in his eyes. That was equivalent to 4 months' pocket money. Also, there's one more thing I'd like you to know. Dumbledore waved his hand, silencing the students. For this activity, you can team up in pairs. Simply combine your bracelets with someone else's. Of course, the number of questions you answer won't decrease if you team up in pairs, and both bracelets need to turn black to earn the required time. The students' excitement grew even louder, and many began to exchange glances, their eyes connected. What an interesting activity. After breakfast, Guan Qiong and the trio left the Great Hall for their first class. Guan Qiong looked at the bracelet on her wrist, thinking to herself. Just now, the first question had appeared on the bracelet, asking what the purpose of the Werewolf Council was, and Guan Qiong had answered it easily. Of course, he had written directly with magic, and the bracelet could recognize it. Next to him, Hermione had just finished answering the first question, and a tiny black dot had appeared on both of their bracelets, like a drop of ink on a pristine white canvas. Harry and Ron, meanwhile, were still pondering their questions, clearly a bit difficult for them. But it all came to a halt when they pulled out their notebooks. Harry and Ron flipped through them, seemingly searching for notes. After writing something down, they finally got what they wanted, the answers to the questions on the bracelet. It wasn't that hard. Ron said happily, closing the notebook. Hermione glanced at Ron but said nothing, pretending not to notice. Guan Qiong did the same. The two remained silent until the dwarf stood in front of them. I have a message about the arrangement to deliver to Guan Qiong personally, the leading dwarf said, preparing to strike his harp with an aggressive stance. 2, the other dwarf next to him said. 3, the next dwarf continued. 4, 5, 16, the last dwarf finished, a look of frustration on his face. He held 3 messages, which he was about to play 3 times. Ron stared at the dwarfs in amazement, then turned to Guan Qiong. He hadn't expected Guan Qiong to be so popular. The day had barely begun, and she'd already received 16 cards. But judging by the current situation, it seemed those cards weren't going to be easy to receive. Just then, the dwarf at the beginning suddenly looked at Ron next to him. Ron Weasley, there's a message for you. Wait here. Ron's face froze, and he stepped back. Looking at the sullen, uncouth dwarf before him, he quickly shook his head. No thanks, I don't want to hear it. By now, a number of students had gathered around him, and Ron had a feeling that if he heard that message in public, he might as well change schools. And yours, Harry Potter, you have a message too, the dwarf said. Harry also stepped back, swallowing, a little flustered. The students around him began to stir, their chatter growing louder, punctuated by laughter. Among them were familiar voices, like Fred and George. It's Fred and George, Ron said angrily. The others might not have recognized it, but as their younger brother, how could he not? He immediately looked around angrily, but the crowd blocked his view, so he didn't see his 2 mischievous brothers. Meanwhile, the dwarf had begun to play, his face full of affection as he looked at the silent Guan Qiong, about to start singing. Then he stopped, his hands tightly covering his mouth, his eyes bulging with surprise. He felt his body losing control. Guan Qiong gently waved his wand, looked at the 12 dwarfs in front of him, and sighed. It was really worrying. Fortunately, he had recovered enough to cast some magic, otherwise he really didn't know what to do. He couldn't possibly end up fighting these dwarfs in person, that would be too humiliating. Of course, he couldn't listen to the end of their song. He still had to go to class, and there was no need to torture himself. He had just eaten a full meal and didn't want to vomit. Chapter 159 Hermione's Little Impulse. In the end, Guan Qiong didn't do anything, merely warning the dwarves to pretend they didn't see his greeting card, or he'd freeze them for a day, forcing them to miss work and lose their chance to earn money. After all, he wasn't a villain, and this wasn't some sin-filled city, but a school. Harry and Ron had escaped unscathed thanks to Guan Qiong's presence, and the dwarves stopped sending them gifts. But Ron's eyes flickered, as if he was trying to find the dwarves and give his brothers a good gift, including Fred and George. He also wanted to see Percy's expression when he received the dwarves' card. I feel like these dwarves Lockhart hired are playing a completely different role than he intended, Harry said. It seemed the students were using them more to annoy others than to send gifts. Just now, the dwarves had come again, this time at Malfoy's request. Because of Guan Qiong, the dwarves had told him everything, including the contents of the gift. Harry was sure that if the dwarves had actually sung those things in front of him, he would have to live under a mask for the rest of his life. I think that's perfect. Lockhart's idea is quite interesting, Ron said excitedly, scribbling something in his notebook and asking for his thoughts. He was planning to give Percy a loving confession, a gift that would make him feel the love and care of his brother. Guan Qiong, however, was looking at the bracelet on his wrist. Just now, the second question had appeared on the bracelet, and he and Hermione had answered it without hesitation. The questions weren't too difficult, though they did require some reading. Ron and Harry, standing next to them, also quickly answered them with the help of their notebooks. They had just finished their first class, and as the four of them walked down the corridor, Guan Qiong noticed that many students were looking at their bracelets and running towards the library, apparently to look up information to answer the questions. Others, however, held notebooks in their hands, seemingly flipping through their old notes, and then answered the questions very quickly. Guan Qiong touched his chin, a look of understanding crossing his face. It seems this activity is also part of Dumbledore's plan. With this bracelet, it's easy to identify those who are influenced by Tom. Since they have Tom's help, they'll naturally answer questions much faster than those who aren't. Furthermore, by using the Valentine's Day format, the students won't find it awkward, and Tom likely won't find it problematic either, thus avoiding alerting the enemy. This way, the subsequent questions will likely be screened more thoroughly, resulting in faster questions and more difficult content. Guan Qiong thought to herself. At this moment, Hermione beside her suddenly spoke in a low, awkward voice, "Qiong, what's wrong?" Guan Qiong looked at Hermione. Hermione's face was unusually hesitant, her eyes full of confusion. After a moment, she spoke with a slight stammer. "Look, Professor Dumbledore's event has a 100 gold galleon prize at the end. I was thinking, if you can get those 100 galleons, you won't have to work as a bartender at the Leaky Cauldron during your holidays, and you can spend more time studying or traveling. Of course, I don't mean to look down on bartenders. I just think you could have better things to do. You're so smart and talented, you should waste your time working part-time jobs. With this money, you'll have more free time. I remember you said before that you wanted to get out and about. After all, staying in one place all the time limits your thinking." Hermione's ramblings escalated, but Guan Qiong didn't stop her, just watched. Meanwhile, Ron closed his notebook and ran off excitedly. He only had one class in the morning, and he was going to find the dwarves before giving Fred, George, and Percy a surprise at noon. Harry, carrying his notebook, headed for the library. He also desperately wanted the 100 galleons, and he had a vague feeling that to obtain them, he couldn't rely too much on Tom. So, he planned to go to the library and find the information to answer his questions himself. Hermione continued to talk, but she realized that her words were drifting further and further from her own thoughts, and finally stopped awkwardly. "So," Guan Qiong asked, waving her wand. "What I mean is," Hermione tilted her head, her face flushing slightly. "Should we team up?" A small voice came from Hermione's side, and if Guan Qiong hadn't had better hearing than the average person, she wouldn't have heard it at all. Teaming up was a normal thing, a rule publicly announced by Professor Dumbledore, and there was nothing wrong with it. However, today was a special day, and this event had begun on this special day, so the act of teaming up was inevitably mixed with some ulterior motives. This was especially true between men and women. Don't get me wrong, I was thinking that if we could help each other, we'd be able to answer questions much faster, and our knowledge would complement each other's, Hermione explained, still not looking at Guan Qiong, leaving only her cheeks flushed like an apple. She felt her face burning, as if she'd been in the sun all afternoon. I didn't have any other motives, I just wanted to help Guan Qiong. If we didn't team up, Guan Qiong wouldn't necessarily be able to beat Tom on her own. Hermione told herself that she'd seen Tom's prowess. Virtually no question stumped him. Any question he asked, as long as it was in the textbook, he'd have the answer in a matter of seconds, as if he had an entire library hidden in his notebook. So, teaming up with Guan Qiong was for a safer chance of victory. That was her thought, nothing else. Hermione kept repeating this in her mind, her face only growing redder. Something inside her seemed to be quietly breaking. Of course, Hermione. Guan Qiong waved her wand, sending a dot of light floating in front of Hermione, agreeing to the idea of teaming up. Teaming up does have its advantages. While he reads a lot, it's not enough to exhaust an entire library. Currently, his knowledge base is largely concentrated in the history of magic and potions, with a smattering of novels, biographies, and mythology. While he's also dabbled in other areas, it's not in depth. Therefore, teaming up with Hermione, with each of them filling in gaps and helping each other, could truly enhance their strengths and create a powerful alliance. As for the Valentine's Day teaming, Guan Qiong, possessing an adult soul, currently has no second thoughts about the little girl Hermione. As for Hermione's thoughts, Guan Qiong smiled at the blushing Hermione. If Hermione were 18 now, he'd seriously reconsider their relationship. But now, at 13, it's just playful, and Guan Qiong wouldn't dwell on it. Instead of dwelling on that, he should focus on how to spend the 50 gold galleons. Hermione's words just now really hit home for Guan Qiong. After so many years in this world, he couldn't just stay stuck in England forever, he needed to get out and about. He wrote this paragraph for 3 or 4 hours, until 2 a.m. but I still can't guarantee that I have written it well. If you have any questions while reading it, please leave a message and I will rewrite it. Chapter 160 begins. Finally done, Hermione said happily, watching the bracelet on her wrist turn completely black. Beside her, Guan Qiong's bracelet was no longer white, but had turned pitch black. Today was the 5th day after Valentine's Day. Since he and Hermione teamed up, their bracelets had become one, even as they responded to questions. Furthermore, the questions on their bracelets were identical, allowing anyone to answer them. Of course, the number of questions was double that of a single person, to ensure fairness. Overall, working as a team was still far more advantageous than working alone. After all, it's impossible for a single person to understand every aspect of knowledge unless they had a little elf to ask and answer questions at their fingertips. Guan Qiong observed that the students clearly fell into 2 groups. One group carried notebooks. While some tried to answer questions on their own, they still consulted their notebooks when they encountered a problem they couldn't solve or were at a loss for answers. This created a gap between them and the other group. The fastest students had answered all the questions by the 3rd day, and their bracelets had turned black. Although Hermione and Guan Qiong often read in the library, they couldn't claim to know everything. Some more obscure knowledge still required searching the library's books for answers. Fortunately, they still had time. Guan Qiong looked at the time displayed on her bracelet. It was 10 a.m. 2 days from now. This meant they would have to go to the Great Hall at that time to take on the next round of trials to determine the winner. The winner, or team, would receive a reward of 100 galleons. However, Guan Qiong was more concerned about what would happen that day than the galleons. According to Dumbledore's plan, 2 days from now would be the time he would capture Voldemort's memory, Tom. I wonder how the competition will determine the winner, Hermione said nearby. She was a little worried because Tom was so powerful, it made her feel a little hopeless. She thought of Tom as the computer she'd used during her vacation studies, connected to a vast library database. Any question, simply by asking, would yield the answer. I think Dumbledore will give us a fair way to compete, and, you know, Dumbledore won't let Tom continue to exist. Guan Qiong waved her wand, sending out a light to comfort Hermione. That's right, but whether Tom is there or not, we must try our best to do our best, and we won't lose. Hermione raised her fist to cheer herself and Guan Qiong up. Guan Qiong looked at the confident Hermione, smiled, and also raised her fist. The 2 of them bumped their fists in the air, cheering each other up. Time passed quickly, and it was 2 days later. On this day, the bracelets on all the students' wrists changed. The bracelets that had not turned completely black fell off automatically, and then turned into a ball of light, dissipating in the air, as if they had never appeared. And those bracelets that had turned black were constantly vibrating, as if urging them to hurry to the auditorium for the second round of activities and competitions. Guan Qiong, Hermione, Harry, and Ron arrived at the Great Hall. Ron, constantly using his notebook, had finished all the questions by the third day, which filled him with pride for a few days. In the Gryffindor common room, he often inadvertently extended his right hand to show off his bracelet. This earned him a few scoldings from an angry Percy. Ron actually had the dwarfs give the twins and Percy a musical birthday celebration. The twins didn't seem to mind it, instead happily singing along. Percy, however, was furious. Fred and George had given him 2 birthday gifts, and the dwarfs had to sing the praises 3 times in a row, practically burying their heads in front of their classmates for half an hour. Penelope had also heard the news and rushed over. Seeing the scene, she nearly collapsed in laughter. This left Percy sullen and angry for several days, his face sullen. However, Penelope teamed up with him for Dumbledore's event, which cheered him up again. He pretended not to be on the same team, as he didn't want to be teased by Ron and the twins. Of course, they also used notebooks, but they often preferred to research together in the library. Even though they met the requirement, they only finished answering all the questions on the 6th day, causing their bracelets to turn black. It was the same with Harry. Although Harry used a notebook, he felt a constant sense of insecurity, as if the notebook and Tom would one day be gone, just like the encyclopedia Dudley had stolen from him when he was 7. So, while he used the notebook to ask Tom questions, he also spent a considerable amount of time searching for answers on his own. He couldn't explain why, but he felt a deep sense that this was the right thing to do, that he shouldn't just ask Tom whenever he encountered a question he didn't understand. Guan Qiong and the others arrived in the auditorium and were immediately greeted by a completely different view from their breakfast. The 4 long tables had vanished, replaced by rows of smaller tables with chairs, forming seating areas. The seats were spaced far apart, allowing students to sit far apart and unable to see each other. Strange patterns were also painted on the ceiling and surrounding walls, resembling strange writing or some unusual design. Tall trees, strange flowers, twisted snakes, and so on. At the professors' desks in the front, the professors solemnly awaited the arrival of the students, except for one person. Snape. He wasn't in the hall. Strange, why isn't Snape here? Was he expelled? Ron said excitedly. Could it be that the bad things he did in private were discovered? I always say he's not a good person. He looked around excitedly, and sure enough, there was no sign of Snape, which made him happy. He had recently grown to dislike Snape even more. During class, Snape had asked him difficult questions, and he had answered them all, but Snape hadn't praised him at all. Instead, he looked at him with a cold and sarcastic look, as if he hadn't answered them himself, but had peeked at the answers. Although he did ask Tom, Tom was his notebook elf. It was normal and proper for students to look through their own notebooks to find the answers, wasn't that? Chapter 161 Dream. Harry also looked around, somewhat relieved that Snape wasn't there. Snape's gaze was incredibly oppressive, as if it could see through his heart. Under Snape's gaze, he felt like he was always going to make mistakes, even if they were mistakes he knew were possible and could have avoided. Several people entered the Great Hall and followed the guidance of their bracelets to their seats. Each table had its name marked on a slip of paper, as if it were prearranged. Guan Qiong and Hermione's seats were in the left corner of the Great Hall, where Guan Qiong could see the backs of everyone in the room, and so did Hermione. As time drew on, more and more students arrived, and soon the entire hall was full. The scene reminded Guan Qiong of exams in her past life. Well, with the constant movement of teachers, it felt even more like it. After the seats below were filled, the professors above glanced at each other and nodded. Lockhart, though clueless, pretended to know, smiling at the students below. If Dumbledore hadn't stood up first, he would have wanted to greet the students below. Everyone, please be quiet. Dumbledore waved his wand slightly, making his voice louder and louder, drowning out the students' chatter. First of all, I'm glad to see you here. This means you've answered all the questions I set. Each question represents a piece of knowledge, and I'm pleased to see so many people possessing knowledge, Dumbledore said, looking at the notebooks on the students' desks with a satisfied smile on his face. However, it's important to note that while we can often gain knowledge and solve problems by searching for information and asking others, more often than not, we need to rely on ourselves, Dumbledore said, then waved his wand. Countless white parchment papers appeared from the ceiling and fell onto the tables in front of the students. Similarly, quills and ink grew from the tables, like flowers blooming. A complex and profound transfiguration. As the students looked at the questions on the test papers before them, Dumbledore waved his wand, and all notebooks levitated and flew towards him. All of these questions are from the past week. You have either looked up the answers or solved them through other methods. Dumbledore smiled, looking at the students, whose faces paled. But now, everything depends on you, on your own memory. Only those who can answer these questions on their own can be considered to have truly mastered the knowledge. Also, 4 wizards forming teams, your final score will be divided equally based on the combined scores of your 2 companions. I believe this is a fair solution, Dumbledore added. And this, he waved his wand again, and a trophy grew from the table before him. Then, gold galleons rained down from the ceiling, landing inside the trophy. The galleons piled up on the trophy into a small golden mountain, emitting a captivating glow that drew everyone's attention. 100 gold galleons as a reward for the final winner. Dumbledore smiled with his eyes narrowed, and finally waved his wand. Sparks flashed from his wand. Now, start answering the questions. The students below looked at the gold galleons above with fiery eyes, and then lowered their heads to look at the questions in front of them. Sure enough, they were all questions that had appeared on the bracelet before, and they had all answered them before. But there were still many students who changed their expressions, including Ron. He looked at the questions in front of him and his face turned pale. He only had the most basic impression of these questions, and as for the answers, he couldn't remember any of them. He even had no memory of some questions, because he just glanced at the questions and went directly to ask Tom. Looking at the wizards around him who had already started writing, Ron gritted his teeth, picked up the quill pen, and began to write. No matter what, he had to fill up this test paper. Harry, on the other side, fared much better. He looked at the questions before him. He'd carefully researched them all. Even the ones he'd asked Tom, he had a good grasp of them and could definitely write something down. Great, Harry thought to himself, excitedly starting to write. Hermione was similarly quicker to write. She knew the answers to every question in her head. Although there were many points she didn't understand, she had memorized them as she and Guan Qiong searched for the answers. This exam presented no challenges at all for her. Guan Qiong didn't move, simply staring at the table in front of her. There was nothing there. Then he tilted his head and looked around. All the students were asleep on their desks. A faint, sweet scent, like the scent of night-blooming lilies, lingered in the air, inviting them to sleep. Snape walked among the students, holding a bottle that exuded that intoxicating scent. He passed by each student, observing them, making sure they were all asleep. Except for Guan Qiong. He had given Guan Qiong the antidote beforehand, making him immune to the potion's effects. This was Dumbledore's order. Up ahead, in the professor's seats, Lockhart was also sound asleep, occasionally chuckling, as if dreaming of something auspicious. Beside him, Professor Flitwick waved his wand, and a powerful magical force emanated from him, cascading down upon all the students, connecting their minds and drawing them into the dream he had woven. A combination of illusion and soul magic. Beside Professor Flitwick, McGonagall surveyed the patterns on the surrounding walls, then looked down at the students below, all fast asleep, lost in their dreams. She addressed the solemn Dumbledore beside her. Albus, we may begin. Her hand gripped her wand tightly, ready for battle. Of course, Minerva, Dumbledore said, his eyes twinkling. He waved his wand downward, and all notebooks on the desks began to levitate under the influence of the magic, just as in a dream. However, unlike in the dream, they stayed in the air and did not move closer to him because of Dumbledore's magic. Chapter 162 Top Student Tom. Dumbledore's expression grew grave, as did the other professors, all staring at the notebooks in the air. Reveal yourself, Dumbledore shouted, and a surge of magical power, several times more powerful than Flitwick's, erupted, surging in all directions. Everyone felt the suffocating force, as if they were being sucked into an ocean. Flitwick's magic was affected, and in their dreams, the students watched in amazement as the walls and ceiling of the Great Hall rippled like a curtain. Fortunately, his strength was considerable, and since he was only affected by Dumbledore's influence, a simple wave of his wand stabilized the dream magic. Meanwhile, Snape chanted softly, and the liquid in his potion bottle began to boil. A richer aroma filled the Great Hall, lulling the students into deeper sleep. He approached the Great Hall door and peered inside. Dumbledore's magic was immensely powerful, its powerful force rippling through all the notebooks, causing them to react. Under the influence of this revelation spell, traces began to appear on all notebooks. A three-dimensional pattern, resembling a palace, emerged, identical to the magical circuits Guan Qiong had previously observed through her magical vision. Simultaneously, gray threads emerged from the notebooks, extending downwards, corresponding to the students below. Each notebook was connected to a student, with only a few students lacking corresponding notebooks. Ginny, Luna, Hermione, and Guan Qiong were among them, along with a small number of 6th and 7th year students. The gray threads intertwined intricately, transforming the entire hall into a cavernous structure. Like a spider's web, the threads intertwined, dividing the space into small sections. It all resembled a gray tumor of silken blood vessels, or a vast silken cocoon, coiled in the center of the hall, as if harboring some monster. Guan Qiong, observing all this, was startled by the scene, but he simply gripped his wand tighter and retreated deeper into a corner. It wasn't time for him to make his appearance yet. Dumbledore looked solemnly at the tangled and intertwined gray threads that stretched above all the students. Then, from the pocket of his wizard robes, he pulled a tattered notebook. It was the original Tom's diary that Guan Qiong had taken earlier. He held the diary in his hands, his eyes gleaming, and then he whispered a spell. It didn't seem to be a modern language, not even a sentence, more like a tone, or something else. But as Dumbledore spoke, a bright white light began to emerge from his hand. Like a flame, it quickly enveloped the diary in Dumbledore's hands. Then, Dumbledore gently tossed the diary, and it floated in the air, automatically opening. Segments of white text appeared from it. The words were not in any modern language. As Dumbledore spoke, the words continued to grow, as if recording Dumbledore's words. Finally, Dumbledore waved his wand powerfully, and a cascade of magical power surged from his body directly toward the diary, causing the words within to glow the same brilliant white light as the diary itself. The diary floated above the silk cocoon that hovered in the center of the Great Hall, landing in the middle of the pile of notebooks. As Dumbledore called out, the words in the diary began to take effect, and white threads began to sprout from the notebooks, like thriving blades of grass or towering trees, reaching toward the ceiling. At that moment, the vast gray silk cocoon seemed like a patch of land, and the white, upward growing threads resembled plants growing from it. However, they weren't plants, they were tentacles, webs. Dumbledore's magical power seemed boundless, pouring madly into the diary, passing through it and into the notebooks, causing each to sprout several tentacles. It took only a moment for the tentacles to reach the ceiling. As everyone watched, they continued to grow, burrowing deeper into the ceiling, twisting and turning, as if searching for something within. Guan Qiong had reason to believe that the threads hadn't penetrated the ceiling to the second floor, but instead extended into that strange passageway, extending deep into the heart of Hogwarts Castle. "Come out, Tom," Dumbledore shouted as the writhing tentacles suddenly tensed, then swung his wand downward forcefully, as if pulling at something. The tentacles began to retract, their tips tangled around something. The object was still struggling, but the tentacles' immense force forced it to fall. Finally, countless tentacles bound a tall boy, who emerged from the ceiling. The boy had shiny black hair, was handsome, and was still dressed in his Hogwarts uniform. His silhouette was a blur, surrounded by a faint glow, reminiscent of Peeves, the school ghost. Countless white tentacles wrapped around him, binding his hands and feet. His torso was also bound, though his head remained exposed. "It's an honor, Professor Dumbledore. I didn't expect you would go to such lengths to let me out," said Tom Riddle, once Voldemort's spirit, the memory of Voldemort's youth left in the Horcrux diary. He smiled faintly, looking down at the solemn professors and the sleeping students below, a light smile on his face, not at all nervous. Since he was in the center of the hall, he hadn't noticed Guan Qiong in the left corner or Snape standing at the door. This required him to turn his entire body, but now his full attention was drawn to the professors in front of him. Especially Dumbledore, standing in the center. Dumbledore's azure eyes, through his half-moon glasses, gazed solemnly at Tom, who was in midair. That was once his most proud student, the one he had once believed could take his place and protect the wizarding world for him. However, subsequent events made him realize he had misjudged him. Tom has great talents and powers, but he does not have a heart full of love. He hates this world. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 163 Action. Tom, your plan has failed, Dumbledore said sternly, looking at Tom, who had been caught in midair. You will receive the judgment you deserve. He had always been a kind and amiable man. Even when students made mistakes, he would give them a chance and guide them back to the right path. However, the man before him had proven that his educational philosophy had no effect on him. Although, this wasn't Voldemort, just his memory. A trial? Tom smiled. He was truly a handsome young man, with a bright and gentle smile that made one trust and accept him from the bottom of their hearts. Tom looked at the professors before him. They stood in a row, half surrounding him. With the exception of Lockhart, who was still fast asleep, every professor had a serious expression on his face. Standing before them, he felt like he was being tried in court. Especially since he was tied up like a prisoner. But Tom was not nervous. I don't know what crime I've committed yet, Tom said with a smile. I'm helping the current students of Hogwarts, helping them make progress in their studies. Similarly, to maintain my existence, I've taken a little of their life force. It won't affect their lives. It's a fair exchange. As for what my original self did, Tom said with a look of regret. Honestly, I don't understand why my future self would do such a thing. He must have encountered some kind of misfortune, which triggered a stir. Besides, it has nothing to do with me. I'm only 16-year-old Tom. You can't judge me by the future Voldemort. Tom spoke with such sincerity, his expression so vivid that it moved everyone, as if he were truly just a fragmented, innocent memory. Dumbledore looked at Tom deeply. This was how Tom had behaved, how he had behaved when he was at Hogwarts. Professors loved him, students respected him, and he understood people so well that Dumbledore hadn't noticed his flaws. However, his secret actions proved that he was never a quiet and friendly person. Just like now. Dumbledore observed the trembling gray threads within the cocoon. Even as Tom spoke heartfeltly, he was simultaneously exerting his own power to influence the students, to control them and sow chaos. This was a foregone conclusion. Tom wouldn't be so kind as to help the students. His real purpose was to control them. Although none of the students had initially shown signs of being controlled, he would undoubtedly act you if things took a turn. Just like now. Don't try, they're sleeping soundly, Dumbledore said. Tom's gentle expression froze, his eyes piercing with indifference as he gazed down at Professor Flitwick, who simply stared back calmly, unconcerned. As for Snape, standing at the entrance to the Great Hall, he gazed coldly at Tom in the air, the scent emanating from the bottle in his hand growing stronger. But Tom couldn't smell it, his spirit body lacked senses. Dumbledore looked at Tom in the air and waved his wand. As for what you just said, Tom, I think you would be happy to tell me whose life you used to create this Horcrux diary. I believe you should remember this. Dumbledore waved his wand, attempting to control the tentacles to connect Tom to the original notebook and seal it. As for whether to search Tom's soul or destroy it outright, that was up to him. But it was clear that things wouldn't go that smoothly. I'm so sorry, Professor, I don't want to go back to that place. It's too small for me, Tom said coldly, his expression dropping. Then he raised his head and opened his mouth to the ceiling. Then, a torrent of black energy descended from the hole, pouring directly into Tom's soul. His eyes darkened, fine green lines appeared on his face, and his wizard robes began to flutter. Dumbledore stared intently at Tom in midair, waving his wand vigorously. Tom's ability to draw upon the power of the castle's Slytherins was something he had long anticipated, and he wasn't unprepared. The patterns on the surrounding walls began to glow brightly. 3 beams of light emerged from the wall, forming 3 blurry shadows that moved toward the hole in the ceiling, forming a triangle that surrounded it. Then, the powers of Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw formed a barrier, blocking the Slytherin power and severing its connection to Tom. Simultaneously, Dumbledore mobilized his white tentacles, attempting to pull Tom's soul into the notebook. But Tom merely sneered. A dark green light emerged from behind him, transforming into a stream of dark green scaly snakes. These snakes slithered along the tentacles that bound Tom, leaving behind a trail of black slime that tainted the very essence of the tentacles. Professor, such tricks won't work on me. Tom raised his right hand, a scaly snake slithering between his fingers. Then, raising his small head, he let out a silent roar at Dumbledore. Dumbledore's face was grim, his wizard robes fluttering, shielding him from the curse's power. Salazar's power, Dumbledore snorted. Although the three had isolated Salazar's power, that moment was enough for Tom to absorb it. And remember, he had been constantly interacting with Salazar's power, and he might have already absorbed a significant amount of it. If it were just Tom's own power, even if he drained the life force of every wizard in the school, Dumbledore wouldn't be troubled. However, Salazar was once one of the four great wizards, and his power posed a challenge to Dumbledore. And, most importantly, he couldn't use his full strength. Dumbledore looked at the students below and the entire hall. Whether it was to protect the students or not destroy Hogwarts Castle, he had to retain some strength. Yes, the power of the great Salazar, Tom said with fanatical eyes. He stretched out his hands, and several giant pythons emerged from his back and pounced on Dumbledore. At the same time, several more giant pythons pounced on the students below. Those students were connected to notebooks in the air through gray threads, and the notebooks then sent out white threads to connect to him, thus restricting his movements. Although he used Salazar's power to contaminate those white threads, making them out of Dumbledore's control, he still couldn't leave. At this moment, he was like a kite, confined in the hall by countless threads. Chapter 164 Battle. Professor McGonagall waved her wand, and giant mushrooms sprouted from the great hall floor, forming an umbrella that shielded the students and blocked the attacks of the giant pythons Tom had conjured from the sky. The pythons bit the mushrooms like steel, leaving only tooth marks but unable to destroy them. Meanwhile, herbology Professor Sprout, the head of Hufflepuff House, also waved her wand. Green plants sprouted from the great hall floor, vines and flowers, entwining themselves around the sleeping students, emitting a green glow that blocked out the curse borne by the giant pythons. Professor Flitwick also increased his power, preventing the students' dreams from being affected. Snape did the same, activating his bottle, making the emanating scent even more intense. Tom looked down at the students, now surrounded by a protective encirclement, a gloomy expression on his face. He gazed at Dumbledore and the professors, his eyes cold. What a disgusting attitude. Fighting me while you're trying to keep the students safe, Tom said. Meanwhile, the scaly snakes he'd released to contaminate the tentacles moved faster. The white tentacles that had grown upward, skewing and binding Tom, turned a dark green, a sinister sight. This prevented Dumbledore from controlling the tentacles and pulling him into the Horcrux diary. But this only made the situation slightly better. The spell Dumbledore had cast on the diary bound him to the students, and without breaking it, he couldn't leave the Great Hall and enter the Chamber of Secrets. Dumbledore didn't reply. Tom naturally couldn't comprehend what he had done. He was a heartless man with no regard for life, and he didn't want to explain anything to this memory. It was pointless. What needed to happen now was to return this memory of Voldemort to where it belonged. Not the Chamber of Secrets, but the diary. Dumbledore raised his wand, pointed it at Tom, and chanted aloud. It was a language not yet spoken today, its rhythm like singing, yet also like a prayer, its voice simple and solemn. But it was undeniable that as Dumbledore chanted the ancient spell, the magical energy around him surged with such force that it resembled a 100-meter-high wave on the ocean. The surrounding magical environment was affected, and the professor's magic inevitably weakened. The diary began to change, expanding as if under a swelling spell. Soon, it was half the size of the entire Great Hall. Simultaneously, its interior was also undergoing changes. A black liquid began to flow from the white pages, and the entire diary became pitch black, like a black hole hovering in the air above the Great Hall. Or like the gates of hell. From the diary's dark pages, pairs of dark hands began to emerge, frantically reaching upwards, grasping at anything they could. The notebooks bore the brunt of the attack. Pairs of hands grabbed them and pulled them into the now pitch-black diaries, leaving no ripples behind, as if they had been devoured. The dark hands continued to greedily grasp at the dark green tentacles growing from the notebooks. Some tugged at them, trying to pull Tom down, while others clawed directly at him. Tom watched all this with a scornful laugh, scornfully gazing at Dumbledore. I never thought the esteemed Professor Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of our time, would wield such vile ancient black magic, Tom said, his tone thick with derision. Simultaneously, more giant pythons and scaly snakes emerged from his body, raining down upon the dark hands below. The giant pythons opened their bloody maws, biting off some of the dark hands, while their massive bodies entangled others, shredding them into shreds. The scaly snakes plummeted into the massive diary below, a black hole, staining it with a dark green aura, attempting to taint and destroy the magic. However, the dark green stains they left behind were instantly swallowed by the blackness of the paper, as if they had never existed. "I do not mind using dark magic when necessary," Dumbledore said, unfazed by Tom's words, but he still explained. After all, there was another student present, and he held even greater expectations for that student than Tom. "Because it is I who wield the magic, not the magic that wields me," Dumbledore said, his wizard robes rustling as an even greater surge of magical power emerged from him, pouring into the magic he was now wielding. More dark hands emerged from the vast diary, reaching upwards, venting their resentment. They tore at the python's scales, devoured its flesh, and the remaining skeleton, shattered by the violent force, fell into the darkness below, sinking and disappearing. Countless black hands piled up toward the center, grasping at each other, forming a spire, its summit facing Tom in midair. Hell beckoned him. Finally, the black hands touched Tom's feet, then the hem of his clothes, then his body, until Tom was completely submerged in the black torrent, leaving no trace of his form. They clutched at Tom, and like a wave reaching its crest, they began to descend, attempting to pull him back into the diary. Success? Guan Qiong, observing the scene before her, loosened her grip on her wand. Tom was no longer visible, only the tall, black spire of black hands growing from the massive diary. Like the Tower of Babel in mythology, it began to collapse downwards, falling into the black diary. Everything seemed over. But Guan Qiong frowned suddenly, as he faintly heard a sound emanating from the spire. Ha, 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 ha. Slytherin, the greatest of the Hogwarts Big Four, descend. A tremendous crash erupted from the ceiling, forcibly breaking the blockade formed by the forces of Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff. A massive hole appeared in the ceiling once again. This time, a hideous, flat head emerged from the hole, gazing down. Chapter 165 The Dust Settles. Powerful magic emerged from the basilisk. Its enormous, light bulb-like yellow eyes gazed at the black tower below, then roared angrily. The tower began to petrify from the top, its color changing from pitch black to gray, emitting a deathly stillness. Then, the petrified area began to crack, and piece after piece of stone fell downward, landing in the diary. Tom emerged from the structure, his body blurry, his clothes torn to varying degrees, but his eyes brightened. The basilisk on the ceiling extended its body downward, using half of its body to anchor itself to the ceiling, blocking the hole in the process. The other half circled around Tom, encircling him. Then, its ferocious, massive head blocked Tom's path, gazing down at the professors below. Its enormous yellow eyes held the coldness of death, a gaze that seemed to petrify even magic. Guan Qiong watched in disbelief. He couldn't understand how the power left behind by Slytherin could be so powerful, so strong that even the power left behind by the other three founders couldn't stop it. Moreover, how could the basilisk he left behind be able to petrify all of Dumbledore's magic? Such power was simply beyond the reach of a basilisk. But in an instant, he had the answer. As the basilisk steadied itself, a gray mist slowly emerged from above its head. Then, a figure emerged from the basilisk's skull. Only half of the figure appeared, the other half seemingly trapped within the basilisk's head, giving it a strange and terrifying appearance. The figure had an old, monkey-like face and a sparse, long beard that drooped down, touching the basilisk's scales and then disappearing into them. Salazar. Salazar Slytherin. Guan Qiong stared at the figure in disbelief. His intuition told him that it was the Salazar of 1,000 years ago. He was still alive. Salazar opened his eyes, revealing a pair of erect, snake-like green pupils gleaming with a faint light. He and the basilisk stared down at the professors below, especially Dumbledore, who stood in the center. Instantly, the surrounding light dimmed, and a chilling atmosphere filled every corner of the great hall. Every student frowned, their bodies trembling slightly, as if they would wake up at any moment. "Albus," Professor McGonagall whispered, worry on her face. Beside her, sweat began to form on Professor Sprout's forehead. Curses seemed to permeate every inch of the great hall, forcing her to exert even greater effort to defend the students from them. Even so, the plants began to wither, while more plants continued to sprout from the ground, maintaining a balance. Hiss ha hi ha hi 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 hi, the greatest Slytherin of the Hogwarts Four, kill them. Tom stood in the center of the basilisk circle, a smug smile on his face. He extended a hand and thrust it into the basilisk's body, uttering parcel-tongue sounds as he did so. Salazar's face wavered, his eyes flickering. But when he sensed the muggle blood among the students below, his expression turned cold. The basilisk beneath him opened its mouth and roared in anger. The basilisk's massive body lunged downward, attempting to destroy the protective shields and slay the students of muggle descent. But Dumbledore wouldn't let it. He waved his wand and called to Professor McGonagall beside him. Take precautions. He wasn't asking Professor McGonagall to protect herself, but to protect the students. He was about to unleash even more powerful magic. A violent surge of magical power erupted, accompanied by a raging fire. Crimson flames erupted from Dumbledore's wand, forming a giant flaming bird in the air. At the same time, Professor McGonagall waved her wand, and the mushrooms began to change color, connecting with each other, dividing the Great Hall into 2 levels. Finally, a steely blue barrier appeared above the students and below Tom and the basilisk. The enormous firebird unleashed an unparalleled heat, creating a massive wave that surged outward. Guan Qiong could feel the temperature in the Great Hall steadily rising, and the patterns on the surrounding walls began to melt and peel. The firebird and the basilisk collided, and the red and dark green energy split the Great Hall in two, one half becoming chilly and the other scorching hot. Under these conditions, the students began to squirm uncomfortably, their faces etched with distress. Even Flitwick and Slip were unable to calm them. If they woke, Tom could exploit their connection to control them, causing even greater chaos and escaping. There might even be casualties, something Dumbledore didn't want to see. Dumbledore stared intently at the basilisk, especially the figure on its body. He finally understood something. Along with the power left by the Big Four, Salazar Slytherin had also left something else in the Chamber of Secrets, making his power even greater than the other three. He had left a portion of his soul, a Horcrux, within the chamber. It seems that the basilisk is Salazar's Horcrux, Dumbledore thought. Without further hesitation, he waved his wand, allowing the firebird to entangle the basilisk. At the same time, he closed his eyes and channeled his magic into the 3 other powers within Hogwarts Castle. Specifically, the power of Gryffindor. The other 3 were left with only their remaining powers, devoid of anything else. This made them appear inert and vulnerable to the soul-controlling might of Slytherin. However, the Hogwarts headmasters, especially those facing the threat of the Chamber of Secrets, had devised a different solution. They could use their own souls to represent the will of the 3. As Dumbledore closed his eyes, a golden light emerged from the ceiling, followed by a nimble figure holding a longsword. The shadow of Gryffindor. But it was clear that this shadow of Gryffindor was Dumbledore's will. The shadow of Gryffindor gazed upon Salazar and the basilisk before him. With a light leap, longsword raised, he lunged at the basilisk like a destined warrior. The dark green magical swamp was split, the snake's tail was plucked apart, and the power of the petrification curse was blocked by the firebird. The shadow of Gryffindor reached Salazar and stood atop the basilisk's head. The basilisk roared frantically, thrashing its head, but to no avail. Then, raising its longsword, under Salazar's cold gaze, the shadow of Gryffindor stabbed it into the basilisk's heart. The basilisk let out the loudest scream ever heard, and the entire Great Hall seemed to tremble at the sound. It wailed in agony, struggling, and finally threw the shadow of Gryffindor off its head. But Salazar's figure had already begun to dissipate. The basilisk was about to die. It had no soul of its own, it was filled only by the will of Salazar Slytherin. Chapter 166 Seal. What a quick death, this was the thought of Guan Qiong, who was watching from below. He hadn't expected Salazar to emerge, barely utter a word, before being stabbed through by the Gryffindor shadow and instantly vanished. It even felt as if he wasn't as capable as Tom. The Gryffindor shadow, in mid-air, now turned its gaze towards Tom, hiding behind the basilisk. The basilisk was still making its final struggles, twisting and thrashing, creating a chaotic scene. For a moment, the Gryffindor shadow couldn't get past a frantic creature. Below in the auditorium, the 4 professors worked together to maintain the students' dreams and protect them from any harm. However, the basilisk's massive, frenzied body pounded against the auditorium, creating a sensation like an earthquake, inevitably affecting the students. Some students' eyelids were already fluttering, and it looked like they would soon wake up. There was no time to wait. The Gryffindor shadow, in mid-air, made a judgment call. He used his sword to deflect the basilisk's flailing head and charged towards Tom. Kill Tom again, and everything will be over. Tom watched the Gryffindor shadow flying toward him, a smile plastered across his face, unfazed. Hiss, 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 come to me, he muttered in a sinister, deep Parseltongue tone, addressing the basilisk. In a frenzy, the basilisk instinctively charged towards Tom. Its massive size made it far faster than the Gryffindor shadow. As everyone watched, the basilisk slammed into Tom, seemingly shattering him. Tom's body shattered under the basilisk's impact, transforming into countless gray mists. The tentacles that had been clinging to his body also shattered. The mist then clung to the basilisk's body, seeping into it like water meeting sand. The Gryffindor shadow tried to intervene, but it was too late. Everything happened so quickly, in a split second. At this crucial moment, the Gryffindor shadow glanced at Guan Qiong in the corner below, and their eyes met in midair. Guan Qiong nodded, took out a bottle of stimulant and drank it, then activated her magical vision and looked at the basilisk in the air. She could see gray mist constantly burrowing into the basilisk's body. Within the basilisk, another massive black mist was dissipating. The gray mist devoured the dissipating black mist, then used itself as the core of the basilisk, stabilizing it. But as Guan Qiong's gaze settled on the mist, it began to dissolve at an incredible speed, as if encountering sunlight. The gray mist melted away at an extremely fast rate, while the black mist was only slightly affected, creating a few ripples. The basilisk roared angrily and looked towards Guan Qiong with icy eyes. At the same time, a surge of magical power emerged from its sides and headed towards Guan Qiong. However, the shadow of Gryffindor intervened in front of Guan Qiong, blocking the petrification spell. As a result, the shadow of Gryffindor dimmed slightly. Guan Qiong clutched his wand, ready to strike at any moment. However, Gryffindor's shadow protected him, preventing him from casting any spells. This was why Dumbledore had kept him awake. Although he didn't know why Guan Qiong was able to harm Tom, Dumbledore had included Guan Qiong in his plan to deal with Tom. He already knew enough. Of course, Guan Qiong was just a backup plan. In reality, if all went well, Guan Qiong wouldn't have to act, Dumbledore could handle everything. However, the appearance of Salazar's spirit had changed things. Now, Tom had replaced Salazar's spirit and controlled the basilisk. Coupled with the constant fighting, the student's condition had become unstable. It was only a matter of time before they could awaken. So Dumbledore had to let Guan Qiong in to try. The effect was surprisingly good. Although the reason was unclear, under Guan Qiong's watchful eyes, Tom's soul within the basilisk was steadily dissipating. The basilisk roared in anger, but the shadow of Gryffindor stood in front of Guan Qiong, preventing it from harming her. Finally, with a loud roar of rage, it used its massive tail to sweep up the black diary in midair and fled towards the hollow in the ceiling. Simultaneously, a low, unintelligible curse emanated from the basilisk's mouth. The gray threads connecting the diary to the students were ripped apart by the monster's immense force, as if they were tangible. Many students' temples bulged with veins, and they groaned in pain. Some students' faces flushed red, while others bled from their eyes. The shadow of Gryffindor attempted to pursue the basilisk, but seeing the student's plight, he paused. However, he still raised his sword and hurled it towards the gradually converging hollow. Simultaneously, two other forces also rushed towards the hollow, forming a triangular formation and forming an intricate seal around the outer surface. As the void completely vanished, the seal formed, sealing the Chamber of Secrets. Professor Sprout continued to cast spells, hoping to stabilize the students. Meanwhile, Professor Snape entered the hall from the entrance, checking on the students. He first came to Harry's side. Seeing that he was fine, a flicker of relief crossed his eyes, but his expression remained impassive. He then walked off to check on the other students. Dumbledore, among the professors, also opened his eyes. The shadow of Gryffindor dissipated before Guan Qiong. Dumbledore's face flashed with solemnity as he surveyed the situation below. He waved his wand, muttering a spell. Immediately, a pure white light emerged from his wand, illuminating the students in the hall. Gray mists continuously emerged from the students' bodies, then dissipated beneath the pure white light. Meanwhile, the students' condition began to improve. Despite a slight pallor, their faces remained normal. Then, without stopping, Dumbledore produced the Eye of Senior and poured his magical power into it. The eye above Senior's opened and scanned the surroundings. Invisible waves spread as its gaze spread, searching not just the Great Hall but the entirety of Hogwarts. The students outside were surprised to see gray mists appearing in various locations across Hogwarts, dancing like flames. Within moments of their appearance, flames erupted from their bases, incinerating the mist. Dumbledore placed his hand over Senior's eye, surveying the entirety of Hogwarts through it. He retracted it only after ensuring that all traces of Tom had been removed. Finally, he let out a long breath and flicked his wand gently. Several exam papers fell from the air, landing on the students' desks. At the same time, under Professor Flitwick's control, the students straightened their bodies and performed the same movements as in their dream. The professors retracted their magic, restoring the Great Hall to its original state. Finally, everyone opened their eyes, seamlessly transitioning between dream and reality. Chapter 167 Ending. Aside from some students turning pale and others feeling aches, there were no other problems. No one realized they just answered the questions in a dream, and the momentary trance was subconsciously ignored. Time's up, everyone. The test is over, Dumbledore said to the students with a gentle smile. The students were in an uproar. Some quickened their pace, trying to squeeze in a few more points, while others wore expressions of relief at finally being done. Ron was like that. He looked at the overflowing test paper in front of him, feeling he'd get a good grade, yet also feeling he'd get a 0. Fortunately, it was all over. He just wanted to eat lunch. He was starving. What should he eat in between? Ron pushed the paper aside, turning away from the bothersome subject, and began to ponder one of life's 3 great questions. Dumbledore smiled at the students below, as did the other professors, their faces perfectly calm, oblivious to the fierce battle that had just taken place in the Great Hall. After a moment, Dumbledore waved his wand, gathering the students' papers and stacking them automatically. He looked at the stack of papers, which smelled of ink, and smiled at the students below. It seems you've done your best. The papers will take some time to mark, and the grades will be announced tomorrow. For now, you can do whatever you please, Professor Dumbledore. Our notebooks, a student said. The other students also looked at Dumbledore. Oh, I had forgotten about that, Dumbledore said with a carefree smile. I'm sure you're all familiar with Tom, the elf who appeared in your notebooks a while ago. He listened to your stories, helped you, and some of you even used him to solve your homework. Dumbledore looked at the students below. Some turned their heads away, not daring to meet the wise gaze of the old man above. I need to explain to you that this is just an experiment, Dumbledore explained, gesturing to the other professors. We thought we could use this method to improve your academic performance and help you learn more, so we have Tom, a magical spirit created within the notebook to answer your questions and guide your studies. The students looked at each other in surprise, having never expected this to happen. Of course, there are some hidden dangers. Some young wizards become too obsessed with Tom and fail to truly internalize the knowledge. Dumbledore gestured to the stack of test papers nearby. This exam is a test. I will assess your performance and decide whether to allow Tom to appear again. If your grades don't improve because of Tom, if your knowledge doesn't grow, and if it only maintains a false sense of progress, then Tom will not appear again, and for those who make good use of Tom and truly internalize the knowledge, I will also reward them. Dumbledore pointed to the trophy on the other side, which contained 100 gold galleons. The glittering gold coins made everyone's eyes sparkle. Okay, that's how it is. Tomorrow, the school will give you new notebooks. As for the ones with Tom's information in them, the school will collect them and deal with them accordingly. Dumbledore finished his explanation, and the students below erupted in discussion and exclamations. However, since Tom's influence had dissipated from their systems, they had no objections to this approach. Okay, now you can go out and do your own things. We need to redecorate the Great Hall. Lunch will be around soon. And I imagine some of you are hungry. Dumbledore smiled. The students began to leave in an orderly manner, going about their business. Hermione approached Guan Qiong, looking at him with some confusion. That Tom, Hermione whispered. Guan Qiong had previously told her about a dark wizard, and about the Chamber of Secrets attack. Professor Dumbledore has dealt with him. The matter is over, Guan Qiong explained, waving her wand. Compared to the truth, Professor Dumbledore's version is easier to accept, isn't it? Hermione thought for a moment and nodded. That's exactly what happened. If Professor Dumbledore said that Tom was a dark wizard and that they had all been affected by dark magic, then there would definitely be people who would panic. Apart from anything else, Neville Longbottom would definitely be so scared that his face would turn pale and he wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Maybe some students would even write to their parents to complain. Even if Professor Dumbledore had gotten rid of Tom, they would still be afraid and might even cause other troubles. Thinking about it this way, a good explanation that made sense was indeed better than the truth. Of course, the premise was that Professor Dumbledore had really gotten rid of Tom. So, the problem of the Chamber of Secrets has also been solved. We don't have to worry about attacks anymore, Hermione said happily. Guan Qiong nodded, and Hermione turned her attention to other matters. Qiong, how did you do on the test just now? I'm unsure about 1 or 2 questions. I clearly memorized them beforehand, but I forgot some details when I wrote them down. Miss Granger, if you don't mind, I have something to ask Guan Qiong. When Guan Qiong was unsure how to respond, Dumbledore approached them and spoke. Of course, Professor Dumbledore, Hermione nodded. Dumbledore then said to Guan Qiong, come with me. I think you'll need a quiet room. How about my office? I have tea and snacks. Guan Qiong nodded, and the two of them walked towards the headmaster's office. Hermione scratched her head, deciding to go to the library and review her shaky knowledge. It's clear that Miss Granger is determined to win this reward. In the headmaster's office, Dumbledore looked at Hermione's answer sheet and smiled. There weren't many mistakes, just a few blurry answers that weren't very accurate. Hermione has been working very hard. Guan Qiong waved his wand, causing a light spot to appear. At the same time, he controlled a quill and wrote on the test paper in front of him. This was a late test. Guan Qiong had not taken the dream test with the other students, so he was making up for it in Dumbledore's office. Chapter 168 Back on track. As expected, Guan Qiong and Hermione received the prize. Hermione only made 1 or 2 mistakes, as did Guan Qiong, which gave their group's average score a particularly high score. Following them were Percy and Penelope. Percy also performed well, making few mistakes, but Penelope made a number of errors, causing the group's average score to fall below that of Guan Qiong and Hermione. Then came the rankings, both for teams and individuals. Dumbledore listed everyone's scores and posted them on the bulletin board for everyone to see. However, out of respect, only the top-ranked Guan Qiong and Hermione were displayed directly. Touching their names revealed their answers. As for the rest of the rankings, it was up to the students themselves to decide whether to publish their scores and test results. Most of the top-ranked students chose to publish their scores, while the lower-ranked students had fewer who published their scores, leaving the rest of the rankings completely obscured. Only the students themselves could see their own rankings. Great, Joan, congratulations, Harry said happily to Hermione and Joan as they stood in front of the bulletin board, looking at their results. Harry's results weren't too bad, he was near the top of the class. After all, those were the questions the bracelet had previously asked him. As long as he diligently searched for the answers himself, he couldn't do too badly. Beside Harry, Ron stared at the bottom of the list of grades on the bulletin board with a somewhat grimace. Fortunately, no one else could see his results, or he would have been too embarrassed to come out. Besides, Fred and George would surely laugh at him. Hey, Ron, how are your grades? I don't see your name on there. As Ron was thinking this, Fred and George appeared out of nowhere, sandwiched Ron between them, their arms around his shoulders, and said with smiles, "That's none of your business." Ron tried to struggle, but there was no way he could get free, so he was forced helplessly into the middle. You must have relied too much on Tom and didn't really take the time to memorize that information, Hermione said pointedly. Ron didn't answer, he just wanted to find a hole to crawl into. I didn't expect Tom to be the professor's creation. I wonder if they'll make another elf. I think Tom is quite useful, Harry remarked. It had to be said that, to a certain extent, Tom had helped them quite a bit, making their search for information much faster. When searching for the answers to the bracelet's questions, he didn't directly ask Tom for the answers, but he did look for books in the library where Tom could find the answers, which saved him a lot of time. Hermione and Guan Qiong exchanged a glance, and Guan Qiong shook her head slightly. He had spoken with Dumbledore yesterday during the makeup exam in Dumbledore's office. Although Voldemort's memories hadn't been captured or destroyed, they had been locked in the Chamber of Secrets, and the seal of the Three Great Ones, dating back 1,000 years, had been placed on the outside. It was a seal called Exile Lost. Although the sealed Chamber of Secrets remained within Hogwarts Castle, no one could find a way out from within. It was like two equal spaces overlapping, unless someone within Hogwarts Castle summoned them and used themselves as a guide. This also explained why, since Salazar had left behind the Horcruxes and the Basilisk, it was necessary to wait for the heir to open the Chamber of Secrets. Because he was sealed within the Chamber of Secrets, unable to open the door from the inside, he needed someone to provide directions from the outside. 50 years ago, the one who provided the guide was Tom Riddle. 50 years later, that guide was Voldemort's memories. Yesterday, Tom had been sent to the Chamber of Secrets by Dumbledore, who had also scanned Hogwarts with his senior eye, ensuring that no trace of Tom's magic remained outside. This meant that an attack would never happen again. Guan Qiong looked at Hermione and felt relieved. Although she knew that even if attacked within Hogwarts Castle, the power left behind by the other three would protect them, so they would not die. At most, they would be petrified. But avoiding an attack was still a good thing. Oh, by the way, one more thing, Harry suddenly said as they left the notice board and returned to the Gryffindor common room. Glancing around to make sure no one was paying attention, Harry lowered his voice. I asked Tom about the Chamber of Secrets before, and he answered me. What? Ron exclaimed, then suddenly alerted himself and covered his mouth with his hand. Fortunately, the others in the common room only glanced up before going about their own business. Yes, I never thought Tom could answer all the questions. We could ask him about the Chamber of Secrets, Ron said excitedly. What did he say? Hermione asked curiously. She knew, of course, that Tom wasn't the harmless elf everyone thought him to be, but the spirit of the Dark Wizard, and that he was connected to the Chamber of Secrets. Guan Qiong had told her all this. This made her even more puzzled about Tom's answer. Guan Qiong, however, recalled the story of the original novel and wasn't particularly interested. As expected, Harry's face looked grim. He hesitated, but he still spoke. Tom showed me a clip from a story that happened 50 years ago. In it, Hagrid kept a monster at Hogwarts. That's impossible, Hermione retorted. Ron also found it unlikely. Hagrid was a kind-hearted man who loved all life and would never do anything to harm others. However, Ron recalled the incident last year, when Hagrid's three-headed dog nearly bit their necks off. Not really, it's impossible, Ron said hesitantly. You know, Hagrid's perception of danger is different from others. I thought about that, too. To be honest, I don't believe Hagrid would hurt anyone at all. He's so kind, Harry said. He had complete trust in Hagrid and believed him to be a very good person. However, it was undeniable that Hagrid's perception of some things was fundamentally different from others. For example, some magical creatures that seemed dangerous to others were just adorable babies in Hagrid's eyes. The injuries caused by those magical animals, which could be fatal to ordinary people, were just play to Hagrid. Chapter 169 Future Potion 10. So, you're saying it was Hagrid who opened the Chamber of Secrets? Hermione asked Harry. A look of confusion crossed Harry's face, and after a moment, he spoke to Hermione, Gwen, and Ron. I don't want to believe it either, but Tom's account is so true, and Hagrid, you know, he was expelled from Hogwarts for some reason, that makes it more likely, Ron thought. Gwen agreed that Harry was right. If he hadn't known about all that beforehand, he'd probably have doubted Hagrid too. After all, Hagrid's past actions and his attitude towards magical creatures were simply unbelievable. Even if Hagrid had actually encountered the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets, he'd probably have found it adorable, and Hagrid might have dismissed its harmful actions as careless. However, Gwen, knowing the whole story, naturally wouldn't doubt Hagrid. Gwen, what do you think? Harry turned to Gwen, who hadn't joined the conversation, to get his opinion. After a moment's silence, Guan Qiong waved her wand, causing a point of light to appear. I trust Hagrid, but if you're truly skeptical, perhaps you could ask him. Honestly, Hagrid doesn't look like the heir of Slytherin. He's not cold or cruel at all. Let's wait and see, Harry said hesitantly. There haven't been any attacks in ages. Maybe it's over. He didn't want to ask Hagrid why he was expelled. That would surely be heartbreaking for him. You're right. Maybe it's over, Hermione said. Ultimately, the group decided to let the matter go, unless another attack occurred. Guan Qiong and Hermione knew that an attack would never happen again. The source of everything had been resolved, and Hogwarts was now completely safe. Guan Qiong resumed his normal life at Hogwarts, the library, the room of requirement, the classrooms, the dining hall. His condition gradually improved, and by the Easter holidays, he had fully recovered, reaching his peak condition. Meanwhile, he had made significant progress in potions. At least, the pile of books he'd read had already surpassed his own height. For the past few weeks, He had focused completely on potions, attempting to transform his previous attempts into effective, stable potions. In the room of requirement, Guan Qiong didn't use a wand, but simply tapped the bottles before him with a finger, causing them to fly and pour out the liquid inside. Under Guan Qiong's control, the liquid formed into spheres, hovering in midair, awaiting Guan Qiong's use. On the table before Guan Qiong lay a number of other ingredients. Some were familiar: bicorn powder, African bush snakeskin fragments, lace wings, and slugweed. The rest were other ingredients, such as evergreen tree cores as a substitute for mandrake blood, polystichum decoction as a substitute for nasir grass, and time-keeping tree rings as a substitute for long-lasting flour. These were the formulas Guan Qiong had devised after reading over 10 books on potions, aiming to make future potions more stable and safe. Among them, the evergreen core can provide a significant boost of vitality. This vitality is long-lasting, gentle, and mild, and won't damage the vital circuits. More vitality isn't necessarily better. Excessive vitality, if not absorbed or released promptly, can easily cause the body to mutate, transforming it into a deformed monster. The multi-mind decoction sharpens the mind. This multi-mind effect doesn't arouse suspicion, but rather, it creates a mind that is as sharp as 7 orifices, enabling one to better handle various tasks. The most common of these is the dual mind decoction, which allows one to multitask, at least, to draw a circle with one hand and a square with the other with ease. However, it's important to note that the multi-mind decoction doesn't boost energy. On the contrary, multitasking can drain energy more quickly, leading to a more susceptible state of fatigue. This presents a significant problem, and Guan Qiong is still considering how to best address it. Potions that boost energy are common, but conflicts between them and their own side effects are issues Guan Qiong needs to consider. The final ingredient, the time rings, was used to replace the longevity flower. The time rings were extremely thin, only about the thickness of a human hair, making them look like a sheet of paper when laid on a table. They resembled a cross-section of a tree, with layers of growth rings stacked one upon another, representing the tree's age. To use them, simply cut a specific time with a knife, burn the ash, soak it in water, and apply it wherever you wish to add time. The time rings effects were not as overbearing as the longevity flower. They took 1 hour to take effect after a year, while the 60-year effect, as Guan Qiong had previously used, would take 2.5 days. Because of this, their effects did not conflict with or affect other ingredients. Guan Qiong only learned this later. During his previous repair of the stone man's heart, he had added the time rings to his own blood, then added that blood to the Polyjuice potion, allowing him to transform into his future self. The effects of the long-lasting flower not only altered his blood but also affected the Polyjuice potion. Some of the ingredients within it shifted over time, making the entire potion unstable. This made it difficult for him to properly control his transformed state. Logically, even with this surge in magic power, it shouldn't have spiraled out of control to that extent. After all, he had prepared nasir grass, 3 pieces at that. Looking at the ingredients before him, Guan Qiong took a deep breath and directed a nearby cauldron to fly over. These materials had cost him a considerable amount of money. He had already spent 2/3 of the 50 gold galleons he had won earlier on these special ingredients. And that was after getting the cost price through Snape. Potions really cost a lot. Guan Qiong sighed inwardly and controlled the African bush snakeskin fragments and the evergreen tree core to float in front of him. He then wrapped the snakeskin around the evergreen tree core, and a flame emerged from his hand, gently burning them. Only when the entanglement was tighter and the center had bonded did Guan Qiong stop, place the pieces in the crucible, and add water. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 170 Everything is completed. Guan Qiong then added the bicorn powder to the heart potion. Since this was a trial, Guan Qiong didn't buy the finest heart potion, instead using the 2 heart potion. The same went for the other ingredients, only meeting the minimum standards. Of course, even so, it still cost him a considerable amount of galleons, making him sigh at the expense of potions. However, he could also earn a considerable amount through potions, if Guan Qiong could become an excellent potion master. Guan Qiong shook his head, no longer dwelling on such distant matters, focusing instead on the present. After the bicorn powder was added to the heart potion, it transformed from its original pinkish white color to turquoise green. The color was pure, with no impurities or sedimentation, which made Guan Qiong sigh in relief. This indicated that the two effects were not conflicting, but that wasn't enough. Guan Qiong used the levitation spell to control the distraction potion, suspending it in front of him. Then, using a clear water spell and a freezing spell, he formed a crystal clear bowl of ice. After pouring the distraction decoction into the ice bowl, Guan Qiong controlled it to spin at an extremely fast speed, rotating the distraction decoction and bicorn powder within without spilling them. Simultaneously, in the extremely low temperature, the two ingredients merged at a deeper level. She moved the ice bowl to the other side and examined the remaining ingredients. The lacewings and sapgrass weren't too difficult to prepare, they simply needed to be crushed and mixed together. These two herbs were more like auxiliary ingredients. Finally, the timekeeping rings remained. Guan Qiong held her wand in her hand and tapped them on the timekeeping rings, simultaneously opening her magic perspective and carefully channeling her magic. From her perspective, the timekeeping rings displayed the same magical circuits as the surface, overlapping one another. These circuits were as thin as silver threads, radiating a bright glow throughout, like star rings. All Guan Qiong had to do was use her own magic to carve a section of the timekeeping rings from the center. By injecting his own magical power into the space between the two growth rings, he could separate them. With just one pass, he could completely separate the outer ring of the timekeeping ring. This might not sound complicated, but in reality, this piece of material was the most difficult and arduous task Guan Qiong had to deal with today. Because the gaps between the growth rings were so small, if he wasn't careful, his magical power could easily touch the magic circuits within the growth rings themselves. The magic circuits within the growth rings themselves were easily affected, and even the slightest external stimulus could sever them. A broken magic circuit, like a deflated balloon, would dissipate at an extremely fast rate, taking the surrounding magic circuits with it. In other words, a single inaccurate cut could result in the loss of an entire growth ring. Furthermore, the growth rings had to be cut completely at once, as that represented the integrity of time. It couldn't be separated into individual rings and then added to the material. This would subject the material to the repeated erosion of time, ultimately solidifying into a block of time amber and rendering it useless. Because of the unique properties of the chronograph rings, few potion makers are capable of processing them. Many opt for other materials as substitutes, adding them to their potions. After all, without Guan Qiong's magical vision, they can't see the magical circuits. They rely solely on their own experience and observation of the surface to cut. This often only yields success 2 or 3 times out of 10, resulting in significant waste. Guan Qiong took a deep breath, then held it, concentrating on absolute concentration. With the help of her magical vision, the chronograph ring's magical circuits became clearly visible. Though extremely thin and the gaps were minimal, Guan Qiong could clearly see them and even insert her wand into them. As Guan Qiong slowly injected magic power into them, the chronograph rings began to change. With the movement of her wand, a fine crack began to appear in the extremely thin rings, sparkling with tiny silver specks like stardust, a truly beautiful sight. Guan Qiong's hands were steady, as was his magic. With the added benefit of his magical perspective, the timekeeping rings, which would have been difficult for others to handle, proved troublesome in his hands. As the extremely fine cracks met, forming a complete circle, Guan Qiong raised his wand and let out a long sigh, followed by several quick, deep breaths to expel the pent-up waste gas from his body. It was a close call. Thankfully, his lung capacity was still good. Guan Qiong wiped the sweat from his forehead and gazed at the now divided timekeeping rings with a faint smile. At the final moment, his hands inevitably began to tremble from holding his breath, but he held on and made no mistakes. Guan Qiong gently picked up the outer ring of the timekeeping rings and moved the material he had just processed in front of him. He first poured the ice-cold, emerald green mixture of distraction decoction and bicorn powder into the crucible, mixing it with the evergreen tree core and African tree snakeskin fragments. He then lit the alcohol lamp and began to boil. Next, he applied the juice of crushed lacewings and sapweed to the timekeeping rings, then rolled the rings into a very thin tube. Why does it look so much like rolled tobacco? Guan Qiong smiled inwardly and inserted the tube into the crucible. Only 1/5 of the timekeeping ring entered the crucible, the rest remained outside, resembling a drinking straw. As the temperature of the liquid in the crucible rose, the timekeeping straw began to dissolve from the bottom into the crucible, and the lacewings and sapweed juice in the straw slowly entered the crucible liquid, merging with it. Done. Guan Qiong opened the magic perspective and watched the simmering of the crucible. He heaved a sigh of relief when he confirmed that the magic circuit that had just been broken was slowly reorganizing. Next, it was a matter of waiting. At the current speed, it would take about half a month for the timekeeping rings to be completely integrated into the crucible. In other words, Guan Qiong would know the result in half a month. By then, what would appear would not be a mixture of Polyjuice potion and something else, but a brand new future potion 1.0. All you need to do is add your own hair or blood, and then drink it, and you can directly transform into your future appearance and gain your future power. Of course, whether this effect is specific and whether it is stable or not we'll have to wait for half a month to know. Guan Qiong looked at the crucible in front of him, and his heart relaxed. Then he packed up the things around him, took away some extra materials, and walked out of the room of requirement. Chapter 171 Course Selection. Easter holidays soon arrived, and during this time, second-year students had to consider their third-year electives. There were 5 electives: Care of Magical Creatures, Ancient Rune Studies, Muggle Studies, Arithmancy, and Divination. Students were required to choose at least 2 of these, but if they had a strong interest and the time was right, they could choose more, or even all of them. There was no limit. John, which courses are you going to take? In the Gryffindor common room, the second-year wizards were carefully studying the new course list, considering which they should choose. Jean showed Hermione his list, where he had signed his name for every course, signifying that he had chosen all the electives. Oh, my goodness, you can't have that much time, Jean. Even if you go to the professors for extra classes at night, you won't have enough time. Don't forget, we still have 7 compulsory courses, Ron said excitedly, his quill between his teeth. His eyes widened when he saw Jean's choice. Actually, it's possible. It just requires a little skill, Hermione said, humming a tune softly as she signed her name for all her subjects. This way, she could attend classes with Guan Qiong. Oh, she meant they could plan their time together and use the time turner together. This was what Percy had told her. As a prefect, Percy had informed some high-achieving and capable Gryffindor students about the time turner in advance and asked them not to spread the news. Guan Qiong was, of course, among those informed. He and Hermione were informed by Percy, even though he had known about it for a long time. You guys are crazy, Ron muttered. He remembered Percy. He seemed to have taken all the electives, too. He wondered how he had managed it. Could it be that the professors had secretly taught them the spell to clone themselves? Ron's thoughts wandered as he looked at the list in his hand, then turned to Harry. Harry, like him, was struggling with which courses to choose. How about Muggle Studies, Harry? This course will surely not be difficult for you. Wizards who have lived in Muggle society have all gotten high marks in this course, Ron suggested to Harry. If Harry chose this course, then he could also choose this course. With 3 wizards who had lived in Muggle society next to him, he would surely get good grades. Harry scratched his head, not knowing how to choose. On Harry's other side, Neville was also in distress. His family members sent him a lot of letters, giving him different opinions. Each of them made sense to him, but he didn't dare to choose all the courses like Gwen and Hermione. Finally, Neville sighed heavily, closed his eyes resignedly, picked up his wand and checked the list. He chose to leave it to fate. Forget it, Ron, Harry finally sighed and said to Ron. I don't want to see those things at school, it reminds me of my aunt's family, let alone study them. Harry still didn't choose Muggle Studies. Of the remaining courses, Rune Studies and Arithmancy looked difficult, so he passed them up. In the end, he signed for Divination and Care of Magical Creatures. Well, in that case, I'll take those 2. Ron looked at Harry's choices and signed his own. This way, at least he could take classes with Harry. If the course was difficult, having Harry around was always better than having 2 people. Professor Kettleburn from Care of Magical Creatures came to me the other day. He's looking for an assistant. And he chose me. At that moment, Guan Qiong suddenly held out his hand, and a light emerged from it, forming a sentence in front of the group. Ah, assistant, Harry looked at Guan Qiong in surprise. Well, during class, help him with some things, like looking after magical creatures and that sort of thing. Guan Qiong shrugged at the surprised 3. Perhaps because he was about to enter his 3rd year, Professor Kettleburn noticed him. He learned that he had been accompanying Hagrid on patrols in the Forbidden Forest for the past 2 years and had also cared for magical creatures. So, 2 days ago, he privately spoke with him about his thoughts. Patrolling the Forbidden Forest isn't just about walking and digging. When encountering injured magical creatures, one needs to consider the situation and provide assistance, just as they did with the unicorn last year. Guan Qiong had also worked with Hagrid to treat numerous magical creatures over the past 2 years. Professor Kettleburn learned of this through Hagrid, and since Guan Qiong was also about to enter his 3rd year, he approached him about the teaching assistant position. I see in you a deep love for magical creatures. I believe, like Hagrid, you love life and magical creatures. That's why I chose you as my teaching assistant, Professor Kettleburn said to Guan Qiong with deep emotion. He also said that if all went well, he would be retired by the time Guan Qiong graduated, and Guan Qiong could then apply for the Care of Magical Creatures professorship at Hogwarts, thus solving her employment problem. While graduation and employment seemed too far off for Guan Qiong, he didn't consider it. However, he did agree to the teaching assistant position. After all, caring for magical creatures was truly fascinating. However, if the plot unfolded as it did, Professor Kettleburn would have retired by next year, and Hagrid would have been the professor of Care of Magical Creatures. Guan Qiong wondered if Hagrid would need a teaching assistant. Perhaps he did. Without someone to tell Hagrid what was dangerous to the students, who knew what magical creatures Hagrid would bring into the classroom? Even a 3-headed dog was a possibility. After all, to Hagrid, it was just a cute thing, but if you were an assistant, what would you do with the classes? Care of Magical Creatures is more than one period. What would you do when the other grades were in class? Ron asked, bewildered. We'll find a way, Guan Qiong said briefly. The time turner couldn't be shared with too many students. Ron looked at Guan Qiong, then at Hermione, frowning and asking, did the professor really teach you something like the clone charm? How could there be such a spell? If you split a person into several parts, wouldn't they die? Hermione shook her head. Then how did you do it? Ron muttered softly. But he was destined not to get an answer. Chapter 172 Sleepwalking. Life at Hogwarts was uneventful and leisurely. After Tom was sealed in the Chamber of Secrets, the 2nd year passed without any strange incidents, and Guan Qiong returned to her usual peaceful and regular life. After the Easter holidays, Hogwarts completely returned to its former tranquility. Everything that had happened before vanished like ripples in a black lake, leaving no trace. This was confirmed by both seniors' eyes and Guan Qiong's magical vision. There was no trace of Tom's magic at Hogwarts. Of course, some influence had remained. Damn. How do I write this? Ron said dejectedly, looking at the potions paper in his hands with a look of dejection. He was still a foot and a half short, but he had completely lost his ability to make it up. Don't look at me, you have to do it on your own, Hermione said without looking up. She was holding a book called How to Cast Magic Unknown, flipping through it and taking notes. She hoped to find some simple method to trick Lockhart into telling everything. Since last Valentine's Day, Hermione had made several surreptitious attempts on Lockhart, but whether it was pouring sensitizer into his water glass or smearing it on his office doorknob, Lockhart had seen through all of them. He possessed a vast and comprehensive collection of magical items. Fortunately, Lockhart hadn't suspected Hermione of these actions, believing it was simply some jealous person with malicious intent. After all, these things had happened before. But I can't think of anything anymore. Ron withdrew his eager gaze from Hermione and yawned loudly, looking miserable. He felt completely drained, his mind like a rusted, gem gear. Ron, don't you really need to see Madame Pomfrey? You're not in good spirits, Harry said from the side. In front of him, he was almost finished with the essay on the parchment, with only 2 inches left. Thanks to the help of Tom and the answer bracelet Dumbledore had gotten him, he had read a lot of books, and now doing these assignments was much easier than before. No, nothing's wrong, just didn't sleep well, Ron said, shaking his head. What's wrong with him? Hermione asked, looking up at Ron. Fatigue was visible on his face, and his hair, once a blaze of fire, was now dry and withered like burnt weeds. Ron hasn't been sleeping well lately. He's been having strange dreams, and he's even been sleepwalking lately, Harry explained, recalling the events of the past few nights with some concern. Last night, he suddenly sat up and made strange noises, which startled everyone. But this morning, he had no recollection of his dream. It sounds serious. Don't we really need to go to the hospital? Hermione grew worried. It's okay. Just a little more sleep will be fine, Ron yawned again and rubbed his eyes. Just then, Jean returned from outside, carrying a pile of books and parchment, seemingly having just finished her homework. June, this way, Hermione called to Jean. Guan Qiong then approached the trio, handing Hermione her completed potions paper, which Hermione then handed Guan Qiong. The two often reviewed each other's work, helping each other improve. However, most of the time, Hermione couldn't spot Guan Qiong's mistakes, while Guan Qiong could spot some of Hermione's problems. Ron watched the two exchange papers with shining eyes, then yawned loudly, his face darkening. Maybe I should go see Madame Pomfrey. I wonder if the energy potion will help, Ron whispered. Guan Qiong looked at Ron. He knew Ron hadn't been sleeping well in recent days, especially last night when he suddenly sat up, startling everyone in the dormitory. But it wasn't a big deal, it was probably just sleepwalking caused by the sudden increase in study pressure. Guan Qiong thought to himself, reactivating his magical perspective and watching Ron. Just like last night, Ron showed no signs of abnormalities, nor any traces of magical circuits. Dumbledore had already removed all the magic that Tom had previously cast upon the students. Of course, out of caution, especially to prevent Tom from doing anything strange again, Guan Qiong had informed Dumbledore of Ron's recent progress. And just now, when he'd gone to Snape's office for counseling, Snape had shared the findings of their combined observations. There was nothing wrong. Mr. Weasley had simply not been focusing on his studies, and now he suddenly found himself overwhelmed by the overwhelming workload. These were Snape's exact words, and his tone, as he spoke to Guan Qiong, was characteristically dismissive and unkind. However, Guan Qiong felt relieved. It made sense. If Tom had indeed hidden some magic within Ron, Dumbledore, with his senior eyes, would surely have discovered it, and Guan Qiong's magical vision wouldn't have failed to detect it either. You can try, Ron. It might at least help you feel better, Harry said to Ron. Then I'll go check it out later, Ron said, looking at the half-finished paper in front of him. He then cast a pitying look at Hermione and Guan Qiong. Of course, if I could finish this faster, I could get to the hospital sooner. I really hope Madame Pomfrey can stay off work a little longer and wait for me, Ron said. Madame Pomfrey's at the hospital tonight, too, unless you go see her at dinner time, Hermione said rudely, but she sighed at Ron's pale face and tired eyes. Just this once, Hermione said, then pulled out her potions notebook and handed it to Ron. Of course, she couldn't just give Ron a copy of her potions paper, that would be too obvious and Snape would catch her. Her notebook contained the ideas for the paper and some of the knowledge points that would be used. Although the requirement was 4 feet, she had enough material to write 10 feet. Of course, she only picked the most suitable parts and wrote the paper, leaving the rest just enough for Ron. Thank you so much, Hermione, Ron said excitedly, picking up Hermione's notebook and flipping through it, looking at the knowledge that Hermione had listed that could be used. Each point had a detailed explanation, and he only needed to add a few intermediate words and then say a few more words on his own, and that was it. Chapter 173 Hermione's Plan. After returning from the hospital, Ron seemed to be feeling better. He no longer made noises at night, and his daytime energy improved. However, he would occasionally drift off, needing to be called to wake up suddenly, as if he were asleep. Ron? Ron, Harry called beside Ron. Huh? Ah. What's wrong? Ron suddenly jolted awake, nearly shoving the sausage on his fork up his nose. What were you thinking about? Harry asked, a worried look in his eyes. No, nothing, Ron mumbled as he smeared ketchup on the sausage and stuffed it into his mouth. Then he looked at the plate in front of him. The ketchup on his knife and fork had stained him, and the unintentional smearing seemed to have created a strange pattern. Nothing, Ron repeated, picking up another sausage, disrupting the pattern, and then eating it. I'm glad you're okay. Do you want to come to the training later? Harry asked. He'd be going to the pitch for training soon. With only a few days left until Gryffindor's next match, Wood had been squeezing their time like crazy lately. Ron often came to watch them practice, and Hermione would sometimes come, too, when she felt tired from studying and needed a break. Today, she was clearly full of energy, having gone to the library early in the morning. As for Guan Qiong, he had no interest in Quidditch, so naturally, he wouldn't be watching Harry practice. Of course I'm going. Didn't you have a new tactic today? Ron said. But Wood has a new tactic every week, Harry said weakly. He felt like he was going crazy with Wood's new tactics. Even Snape's potion recipes and brewing methods weren't that hard to remember. At least they had a pattern. Isn't this different? Wood said there's a new breakthrough this time, Ron said with anticipation. Every new tactic Wood has is a new breakthrough, Harry sighed, but seeing Ron's expression, he felt relieved. Perhaps Ron's recent workload has been too heavy, making him too tired. Perhaps watching a Quidditch match would cheer him up, Harry thought. Meanwhile, Hermione wasn't in the library. She had dragged Guan Qiong along, leading them to Myrtle's bathroom. This time, it'll definitely work, Hermione assured Guan Qiong confidently, showing him her preparations. In the bathroom's private room, besides the sensitizer Hermione had prepared in a bottle, there was another potion. The potion was entirely blue, with a white substance swirling inside, like noodles, or like clouds in the sky, stretching and shrinking, dispersing and converging. What's this? Guan Qiong asked Hermione. Quick air freshener. Guan Qiong looked at Hermione, the light in his hand condensing into a large question mark, floating in front of them. This is the inspiration I got from that book I read a few days ago, Hermione explained, her face gleaming with excitement. Lockhart has too many warning signs on him. His rings, necklaces, and cufflinks all have warning effects, rendering many methods ineffective against him, but, in the book, How to Cast Magic Unknown, I saw a method. It's to release some potions into the air, Hermione said, pointing to the quick-acting air freshener in the cauldron. Potions in a large area of air will render some warning spells ineffective. Even if warning spells sound, it won't have any effect. As long as he walks into that area and breathes the air, he'll definitely be affected. Guan Qiong was somewhat surprised. He hadn't expected Hermione to find such a method. Excited, Hermione pulled a small, packaged lemon from her pocket. She removed the liquid from the cauldron and squeezed a drop of juice from the lemon, dripping it into the quick-acting air freshener. The quick-acting air freshener absorbed the lemon juice and began to boil. A refreshing scent rose from the bursting bubbles, and soon the entire bathroom was filled with the scent of lemon. This household potion is originally used to quickly freshen the air. It spreads the scent of whatever is placed into it throughout the entire space at an astonishing rate, Hermione said with a smile. And I've tried it before. With the addition of some special herbs to the sensitizer, just smelling it can produce the same effect. It's a little weaker, but still effective. Guan Qiong sniffed a lemon scent in the air. Through his magical vision, a hazy layer of magic appeared in the surrounding air, just like the elven magic he had seen Dobby cast before. A very bold and brilliant idea. Guan Qiong gave Hermione a thumbs up, and dots of light formed a line of praise beside him. It was indeed an interesting combination of ideas, and it had a good effect. As far as Guan Qiong knew, some early warning spells actually work by observing the contrast between the properties of an object and its surroundings. Just like Guan Qiong's magical vision, if he saw a strange magic circuit in a certain area, it meant there was something wrong there. However, Hermione's method could bypass this detection. Because the entire environment was problematic, and this was the most easily overlooked part. Take Guan Qiong now, for example. If he hadn't noticed and memorized the hazy magical properties of the air fresheners, he wouldn't have noticed anything was wrong. In a desert, greenery is instantly noticeable, but in a forest, it's easily overlooked. And, as Hermione had said, even if Lockhart's warning magic item worked, by the time he noticed, he'd already entered the area and inhaled the sensitizer. I plan to do it in a few days, during the Quidditch match. By then, the students will be away at Hogwarts, and there won't be many people in Hogwarts, so there's no need to worry about being affected. And I've already chosen the spot where Lockhart will pass, the third-floor corridor, Hermione confidently told Guan Qiong. She had clearly planned everything. The third floor of Hogwarts was where the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office was located. As soon as Lockhart stepped out, he'd be immediately vulnerable. As long as nothing unexpected happened, this plan couldn't fail. Chapter 174 Summoning. Saturday arrived, the weather clear and pleasant, with a gentle breeze. Today was Quidditch Day, Gryffindor vs Hufflepuff. Harry woke early and forced himself to close his eyes in bed, resting until a pink glow appeared on the horizon. He then scrambled to his feet, donned his gear, and headed to the dining hall for dinner. Ron, Neville and the others rose with Harry, and as if by appointment, they marched out of the dormitory and down the spiral staircase. Guan Qiong was the only one left in the dormitory. As usual, He had accompanied Hagrid on patrol in the Forbidden Forest the previous night, which had kept him up late, so he wasn't awake yet. Today is perfect weather for Quidditch. In the dining hall, the tables were already packed with students, making it seem a bit crowded. Wood added generous portions of scrambled eggs to each team member's plate and offered them encouragement. "It's definitely better than the rainy days before," Harry said to Wood. He remembered the previous match against Slytherin, where it rained heavily and he had broken his hand. But thankfully, they had won. "We'll win today, too," Harry said to himself. Then he saw Ron, sitting next to him, dazed again, his eyes vacant as he stared at the beef pie in front of him. Ron, what's wrong with you?" Oh, nothing," Ron said to Harry, coming to his senses. He rubbed his eyes and said, "Are you really okay?" Harry was a little worried. He had a feeling Ron hadn't been feeling well lately. "It's really okay. You'd better eat quickly, Harry. The game's almost here," Ron urged Harry. After breakfast, all the students rushed to the pitch, forming 4 different colored streams. Harry hurried towards Gryffindor Tower, took out his Nimbus 2000, and joined the crowd. However, when he returned, Ron was nowhere to be found. Hermione was nowhere to be seen either, but she had told him she had something to do and would go to the pitch to watch him play after it was over. Harry felt a tinge of apprehension, as if something was about to happen. But after arriving in the locker room and changing into his bright red robes, all his thoughts turned to excitement and euphoria. Hogwarts Castle, 5th floor. Ron, dazed and sleepwalking, entered an abandoned classroom. Dust-covered desks and chairs lay piled around the edges, leaving the center empty. Ron entered, his movements slow and his eyes blank, like a robot following instructions. A hissing sound emanated from his mouth, like a mechanical malfunction. If Harry were here, he might have understood what Ron was saying. It was Parseltongue. He threw the knife away and drew his wand. Blood flowed down it, drawing an intricate pattern on the ground as he moved. All the while, he continued to chant Parseltongue, his voice growing louder and louder until it was like a roar. S's. He stared straight up at the ceiling, like a powerless robot. The blood-forged patterns around him emanated a faint red glow, making it all look like a sacrificial ritual. 2 enormous yellow eyes, like lights, emerged from the void, carrying a cold and savage aura. Then came a hideous, gray-green scaled head, followed by an immensely sturdy body. The basilisk descended into the classroom. It opened its massive mouth wide towards Ron, who lay motionless, as if to devour him, but after a moment, it closed its mouth again. Looking at Ron before it, the basilisk let out a low, agitated hiss. Hiss, pure blood. It spit out its scarlet serpent tongue, as if sensing something, and then a light shone in its eyes. Hiss hiss hiss, mudblood. The basilisk swung its massive body, leaving the classroom and swimming outside, leaving Ron alone. Guan Qiong was awakened by the shock. He had dreamt he was in a tropical rainforest, exploring ancient and mysterious magical ruins. Then, a massive wave crashed from the sky, surging waters crashing onto the forest, completely destroying everything. Guan Qiong, in this strange and terrifying turn of events, was abruptly awakened. He opened his eyes, only to feel the lingering sensations of the dream linger in his head, and a tightness in his chest, as if he couldn't breathe. But the next moment, he realized it wasn't just a dream. Guan Qiong gazed around him. From his magical perspective, the magic around him surged and churned, creating a massive wave like the ocean. He was trapped in this raging magic, like a small boat, threatened to be submerged at any moment. What was going on? Guan Qiong was alarmed. Could the Chamber of Secrets have been open again? If so, then the target of this attack would be Hermione. Guan Qiong suddenly woke up, a fiery silver light flashed in his eyes, and magic power surged out instantly, stirring around him. His body floated up, and the wand flew out from the side and landed directly in his hand. Then, Guan Qiong flew out of the dormitory at an unprecedented speed, flew down the stairs, and then went out of the passage and came to Gryffindor Castle. In the corridor, Guan Qiong stopped for a moment, thinking about where Hermione might be now. Today is the Quidditch match. If she is on the field, then she is safe. It is impossible for the basilisk to run to the field to attack people. However, Guan Qiong suddenly remembered the plan Hermione told him a few days ago to deal with Lockhart. In other words, Hermione should be there now. On the 3rd floor. Guan Qiong gritted his teeth and flew towards the 3rd floor of Hogwarts Castle. Chapter 175 The Fourth Attack. On the 3rd floor corridor of Hogwarts, Lockhart's face was filled with terror, a panic he had never experienced before, not even on that round-the-world cruise, when he was nearly used as a vampire sacrifice. He could sense the magical items on his person, frantically warning him. The rings on his fingers had turned inky black, the cufflinks on his cuffs vibrated as if powered by a high-speed motor, and the necklace around his neck now radiated an astonishing heat, threatening to burn through his skin all the way to his heart. What was going on? Lockhart's heart trembled. He wanted to flee, but he didn't know which direction to run. Everything around him seemed to radiate malevolence, and he couldn't guarantee that the next intersection he crossed wouldn't lead him directly into the maw of a monster. Perhaps staying put and waiting for help was the best option. After all, with Dumbledore in the school, he could sense what he was seeing. There was no reason Dumbledore wouldn't sense it. Lockhart's mind raced, as if oppressed by a strong sense of crisis. He felt his brain working at breakneck speed, knowledge constantly churning out, and confidence welling up from the bottom of his heart, making him feel that he could even fight against the unknown danger. However, the panic in Lockhart's heart suppressed this thought. He looked around vigilantly, while holding out his wand. At this moment, there was movement from behind him. Lockhart turned around, raised his wand, and was about to recite the spell. However, the person behind him was not the monster that attacked people, but Miss Granger, a second-year student and a know-it-all who liked to get to the bottom of things. Miss Granger, what are you doing here? It's very dangerous here, Lockhart said, and of course, in order to maintain his image, he added another sentence. Of course, with me here, you don't have to be afraid. No matter what danger it is, in front of me, Lockhart, it can't hurt anyone. After all, I'm a member of the Order of Merlin, 3rd class. That wasn't earned by bragging. I earned this honor after experiencing numerous life-threatening adventures and saving countless lives. Looking at Lockhart's rapid speech and the shiny black ring in his hand, Hermione smiled. She reached into the pocket of her wizard robes and turned on Guan Qiong's tape recorder. Then, with feigned excitement, she said, Professor Lockhart, you're truly amazing. I've read all of your books, but there are some things I'm not sure about. I was wondering if you would be willing to help me explain them. For example, you've done so many things. Did you do them all by yourself? Hermione waited expectantly for Lockhart's reply. She was confident that this time she could catch Lockhart on the trail. Strangely, Lockhart opened his mouth, then closed it nervously. He looked at Hermione, thought for a moment, and then spoke. Of course I'd love to tell you what happened, but it's dangerous here. Something's coming. If possible, I'd like you to go ahead and call Dumbledore. Lockhart pointed to the corner ahead. Hermione looked at him in confusion, puzzled. The sensitizer must have taken effect, but why didn't Lockhart reveal everything as she expected? Then, Hermione thought she heard a sound, like leaves scraping against the ground, or a huge tree rolling in the castle. Her heart skipped a beat, and then some kind of biological instinct made her heartbeat quicken, and her breathing became rapid. Hermione also grew nervous, drawing her wand and staring intently ahead. A hideous head slowly emerged from the corner. It had a pair of bright yellow eyes, and its huge, scarlet tongue flickered continuously, carrying a sinister aura. Basilisk. Hermione took a step back, uttering a cry of disbelief. She'd read about this monster in the library, but she couldn't believe she'd encounter one in Hogwarts. It was too bizarre, like discovering a dragon in school. The basilisk looked at the two before it, a deep hissing sound emanating from its bloody maw. Hiss, 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 mudblood. Then, the basilisk turned and lunged at them, its eyes gleaming brightly, its magic gathering. Petrification. I see. This is the monster from the Chamber of Secrets, Hermione realized, turning away, avoiding the basilisk's gaze. She raised her wand, ready to cast a spell to stop the basilisk. She wasn't sure how effective it would be, but she wasn't about to sit there and wait for death. But at that moment, Lockhart gritted his teeth, reached out, and shoved Hermione hard on the back. I'm sorry, Miss Granger, Lockhart said apologetically, but his movements were not slow at all. He reached out and untied the bracelet on his right hand, slamming it to the ground. A pungent smell, accompanied by a strange magical energy, emerged. Magic emerged from the shattered bracelet, clinging to the surrounding walls and ceiling like spider silk, then connecting with each other, becoming dense and dense. It was the blocking bracelet, imbued with an unbearably pungent odor and a blocking and protective spell. However, the magic required time to activate, and the basilisk's speed wouldn't allow him that time. But now, Miss Granger's unfortunate attack by the basilisk had bought him enough time. Lockhart thought to himself, marveling at his own quick wits. He felt his brain working at unprecedented speed. In the blink of an eye, he had come up with a plan to escape and save his life. You truly deserve to be a proud member of the Dark Arts Defense League, Gilderoy. You're amazing. Lockhart ignored Hermione's incredulous expression. After mentally patting himself on the back, he ran away without looking back. He was going to leave this place and find someone to deal with this matter. Of course, he also had to come up with an excuse to disassociate himself from poor Miss Granger's death. Lockhart didn't notice as countless golden lights converged from the surrounding area and landed in front of Hermione, forming a young figure. At the same time, a figure flew towards him at great speed in the direction Lockhart was about to leave. At the corner, Guan Qiong collided directly with Lockhart, sending Lockhart flying and forcing Guan Qiong to stop. Guan Qiong ignored Lockhart, who was slammed against the wall, and his gaze was directed to the middle of the corridor, where Hermione was. There, the golden figure blocked the force of the petrification magic, but some of the remnants still fell towards Hermione. No. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.